Giving up or endeavoring to give up the life of worldliness is the highest and only duty of all persons. The philanthropists have forfeited the sympathies of all honest well-wishers by leading a dissipated life of idleness and debauchery, which is bound to result from taking the name without abstaining from the commission of offenses against the name. The philanthropists are opposed to those restrictive injunctions of the scriptures that endeavor to put down immorality and worldliness. They find it convenient to suppose that it is possible to approach the presence divine with a heart deliberately bent upon sinfulness. They are profane enough, as the result of such habitual commission of offenses under the guise of piety against the name, to dare attribute even carnal desires to Sri Krishna and his eternal consorts against the gravest and clearest warnings of Sri Rupa Goswami, who is admitted by all as the divinely authorized exponent of the nature of spiritual amor. We shall return again and again to this all-important subject as the narrative develops. The life that was led by Thakur Haridas while he was living in the cave at Fulia is described as follows by Krishnadas Kavira Goswami, and it forms the authoritative refutation of the practices and arguments of the philanthropists. Haridas kept constantly walking along the bank of the Ganges chanting aloud the name Krishna. Haridas surpassed all ascetics in his aversion to the pleasures of the world. All praise to his holy mouth, which was ever full of the name of Krishna. He did not experience a moment's disinclination to the name of Govinda. His appearance underwent a constant and novel transformation under the influence of the mellow quality of devotion. Sometimes he danced all by himself. Sometimes he made a sound like that of a maddened lion. There were times when he cried in grief with a loud voice. Sometimes he would indulge in a mighty laughter that was haughty and deliberate. At times he shouted forth ejaculations of sorrow with a deep voice. Sometimes he would lie prostrate in a swoon. He would sometimes shout forth, in the hearing of the people, sounds that belonged to another world, and would then explain the same in the most excellent manner. Shedding of tears, horripilation, laughter, swooning, sweating, the spiritual perturbations that are expressive of devotion to Krishna manifested themselves all together in his holy form the moment Thakur Haridas entered the dance. The flow of the stream of joy was such as to drench all limbs. Even the worst of atheists, Pashhandas, experienced a great pleasure on beholding the same, and the wonder of the series of the bodeous horripilation of which the sight is coveted even by Brahma and Siva. All the Brahmano residents of Fulia witnessed with rapture those holy manifestations. A deep faith took possession of the minds of all those people. In this manner Thakur Haridas lived on at Fulia. After bathing in the Ganges he rambled all over the place, chanting with a loud voice the name of Hari. The activities of the devotees of Godhead are perfectly incomprehensible to the material mind of man, for the simple reason that they do not target anything of this world. The mind cannot understand supermundane activities. It supposes that it has a right to be able to understand every occurrence that comes within the range of its perception. Thakur Haridas appeared to the people of that time as a man living among men. He appeared to them to possess a physical body and senses. He was being fed in the ordinary way every day at Advaita. He used his senses apparently in the same way as any other man. He might have probably been supposed to be a good man and as comparatively indifferent to the comforts of the body. But he did not, as a matter of fact, also really neglect anything that is absolutely necessary for the maintenance of life. There was nothing supermundane about all this. Would it be proper to regard such a person on such testimony as a supernatural being? Even if we choose to consider him as supernatural on such evidence, would we not be led from one mistake to another by such untenable concession to superstition? Would it not be a still greater folly to try to follow the life and conduct of such a person and ask others to do the same under such a notion? Is it feasible to follow with a clear conscience a person of whose conduct the true meaning is not at all possible for us to understand? It would be both possible and useful to accept the mode of life of another person if by doing so our own existing interests and convictions would have a prospect of being demonstrably improved instead of being wholly suppressed. If all persons began all of a sudden to chant the name of Hari night and day and to depend on others for the supply of food which is necessary for them for being able to perform the said function, would not such course tantamount to an idle and suicidal folly? The life of the devotee should have no value if it is not capable of helping us to perform our ordinary duties in a better way. The life must not only be practicable in itself but a distinctive and intelligible improvement on the one that it is to be allowed to replace. The life of Thakur Haridas as depicted above seemed to satisfy neither of these essential conditions. As a matter of fact, we shall see subsequently that Sri Caitanya was regarded as an unbalanced sentimentalist by even the leading Vedantist scholar of Benares, the recognized headquarters of Shastric culture of that day, and this. Persons who devote their intellect to the study of the Shastras in a systematic way need not thereby be rendered devoid of ordinary common sense. The absence of common sense is the usual charge that is brought by utilitarian thinkers against such scholasticism. The empiricists accept without reservation physical nature, as it appears to their senses, as the reality in its immediately available form to be understood for the purpose of deducing conduct that is proper for us to adopt in regard to the world. If the knowledge that is acquired has an evident likelihood of making ourselves unsuccessful in the struggle for physical existence, the utilitarian have no patience for such knowledge. The error of Vedantism, or rather of its interpretation by Sri Sankaracharya, from the point of view of the utilitarians, consists in this: that it does not really provide for the needs of the life that one and all are under the necessity of actually leading in this world as the basis of all possible activities. It may not be possible for the utilitarians to refute the position of Sankara by means of metaphysical arguments, but it is their contention that the theoretical strength of Sankara's position is no refutation of its practical weakness. A Sankarite cannot himself be in love with the life that he recommends others to live. This is too grave a defect to be overlooked. It is even necessary to oppose Sankara in the interest of everybody, including his followers. One must be forced to live, and live efficiently, against every other consideration to the contrary. The arguments of Sankara consequent are appreciated by the utilitarians, but only as a speculative theory of existence that was never intended to be acted upon in practice. Are we required to have a similar attitude towards Thakur Haridas also? Are we to suppose that what is perfectly proper and natural for Thakur Haridas is perfectly improper and unnatural for every other person? The path of devotion followed by Thakur Haridas is, however, not merely a beautiful conception of the human brain to be admired from a distance, but which cannot and must not be followed in practice. Thakur Haridas actually led the life which he tells us is not only practicable but whose full acceptance is the only thing needful for its own sake. Love for Krishna is the one thing needful. Amorous love is the highest form of such love. The realized practice of love for Godhead is the only natural function of the free soul. It is possible for all souls to attain to it. Whoever possesses this spiritual love towards Krishna must be offered, as being a most loyal servant of the Lord, our unconditional homage. It is, however, not possible for the mind of man in the fallen state to understand the real nature of spiritual activities. This is the point of departure of the teaching of Thakur Haridas from that of Sankara, or rather from the current interpretation of the system of Sankara. It is, says Thakur Haridas, practicable for a person in the state of sin to attain to the spiritual plane by the grace of the holy name of Krishna, but the grace of the name can be gained only by serving the name in the proper manner. It is at once easy and difficult to understand how the name is to be served. The name is Krishna himself. He appears on the tongue of his devotee in the form of the transcendental sound. Listening to the holy name from the lips of a sadhu is the way in which he is to be served. The name does not appear on the tongue of a person who is not a sadhu. A sadhu benefits all by his chanting of the name. One must be a sadhu in order to be able to serve Krishna by chanting the name for the benefit of all. The only way in which it is possible for a sinful man to become a sadhu is by serving the name by his ear. The name appears in the form of the transcendental sound on the tongue of his devotee. This sound is identical with Godhead, the only object of our worship. The mode of worship of the name consists in listening to the transcendental sound by means of the spiritual ear, because the fleshy ear cannot hear the transcendental sound. The spiritual ear belongs to the soul, but in the case of the conditioned soul it is in the dormant state. Its function is then delegated to the material ear. But the soul should like to resume his own function if he likes, and he is also likely to like to do so when he understands that it is necessary in his own interest to do so. In the state of willful transgression, the soul is forgetful of himself and his natural function. The sadhu, i.e., the pure soul in his natural state, possesses the power, delegated to him for the purpose by Krishna himself, of making the transcendental sound be heard by the forgetful soul. As soon as the fettered soul hears the transcendental sound, the function of his spiritual ear is reawakened, and the enlightened soul is then fit to serve the name by his opened spiritual ear by the method of submissive spiritual hearing. It is, therefore, necessary to submit to hear the holy name from the lips of the sadhu on his own conditions. Till this duty is properly performed, we can have no access to the plane of the activities of the real devotee. Sankara is silent about all these details which really matter. His so-called followers are as a rule opposed to all spiritual activity. It is our function to introduce the reader to the nature of the spiritual activities of the soul in course of this narrative. Our hero is Sri Gaurasundar, the Supreme Lord himself. He is at once the only source and the only object of all worship. We have seen that the Divine Master and Lover appears in Gaurasundar in the role of his own servant and mistress to teach us how to love him by making the experience available to us by himself tasting the love for himself. But up to the point of his career that has yet been reached, the Lord has not set up openly as teacher of the religion. Sri Gaurasundar, to the eyes of his contemporaries of this world, was as yet no more than a dutiful and learned Brahmana householder, assiduous in the performance of all those duties that ordinarily fall to the lot of a God-fearing Brahmana. There was as yet nothing unusual or extraordinary about him. Had his career terminated at this point, he might have been regarded as having confirmed by his conduct the mode of life led by the Brahmana householders of Nabadwip of that period. We now know that this was by no means his purpose. But his real purpose had not yet been divulged to anyone. That purpose was not understood, even when it was subsequently fully divulged, by most of his contemporaries. The reason of such misunderstanding is plain. Sri Gaurasundar's life can be understood only if we submit to be spiritually enlightened. Thakur Haridas is the teacher, authorized by Sri Gaurasundar himself, from whom we have to learn how in this iron age we are to receive spiritual enlightenment. The purpose of Sri Gaurasundar is not to teach personally the method that is to be followed in this age, by those souls who are in the state of bondage, for attaining the spiritual life. That function is not directly exercised by Sri Gaurasundar or Sri Krishna. It is the function of Nityananda, but not even his main or direct function. Nityananda or Baladeva is the second self of Sri Krishna or Gaurasundar, and they represent the Supreme Lord in his aspect of the possessor of all majesty, all power and all grandeur. Baladeva is the source of all service of the divinity in the outer hemisphere of the transcendental world. It is the indirect function of one of Baladeva's secondary selves to direct the service of the Lord in this lower, phenomenal world. This particular secondary self is styled Mahavishnu in the scriptures. But even Mahavishnu does not come in direct contact with the material mind or anything mundane. That function is delegated to Vishnu, who is a secondary self of Mahavishnu. Vishnu himself also is located outside this mundane world. All the secondary selves of the Supreme Lord, issuing ultimately from Sri Baladeva or Nityananda, are absolutely spiritual in all their divine activities. The connection between the two planes, viz., the spiritual and material, is established by Siva, whose nature is most difficult to understand. It is a mixed one, being both divine and non-divine. Brahma, the first progenitor of all the creatures of this phenomenal world, is associated with Siva in carrying out the will of Vishnu, who is the direct divine master of this phenomenal world. It is the object of both Siva and Brahma, who are the servants of Vishnu, as their highest function to divert the minds of fettered souls to the service of Vishnu. Brahma appears in the transcendental pastimes of Sri Gaurasundar in the form of Thakur Haridas, who is delegated the function of promulgating the dispensation of the age, viz., the chanting of the name of Krishna. This function, which belongs ultimately to Sri Gaurasundar, is exercised directly and fully by Thakur Haridas as his authorized function. The function thus divinely delegated to Thakur Haridas is by no means an unimportant one. It is, on the other hand, the one thing needful not only for souls in the state of bondage but for all souls. It is the only function of all souls, who of course vary in their degree of its realization. There is no higher function than love for Krishna. Thakur Haridas teaches how the conditioned soul may attain to the love of Krishna in this age of sophistry by chanting without offense the holy name of Krishna. The life of Thakur Haridas presents us with the career of a pure soul who practices the chant of the holy name of Krishna without offense. The life of Thakur Haridas at Fulia, described by Thakur Brindavandas in a few pregnant words, is for this reason one of the most important parts of the present narrative, inasmuch as it introduces the reader, if it is rightly understood, to the true meaning of the other parts. It will be our endeavor to establish, by the grace of Thakur Haridas, the truth of the proposition that the method of chanting the holy name of Krishna, in the manner that is free from offense, is the only perfect service of the Lord, having the unique quality of being both the means and the object of all spiritual endeavor. as means the name is accessible to the worst of atheists, especially to that stubborn species that belongs to the present age who are fortified against the spiritual function by all manner of sophistries. Access to the name is closed to none who are prepared to recognize the name of Krishna as identical with Krishna himself and not as a mere passing sound of the mundane atmosphere, and that the name does not, therefore, manifest himself on the material tongue of the physical body which cannot serve the divinity. The name can be served when he manifests himself on the spiritual tongue as the transcendental divine sound. The spiritual service is possible only on the appearance of the name, in the form of the sound, on one's tongue. The name first appears to the listening ear of a person who submits to receive him as he appears on the lips of a sadhu. The name of Krishna appearing on the tongue of a sadhu as transcendental sound is not a figment of the imagination. He is the only reality, being the absolute person himself. If the name is served by the method of perfect submission under the direction of a sadhu, by such service love for Krishna is obtained. By no other method one may be enabled to realize the love for Krishna. It is for this reason that the name is the highest and only means. It is quite in keeping with the conclusions of our unbiased reason that Krishna in his own form can also be the only means of his highest service. But against this, if it be urged that as the form, quality, activity and servitorship of Krishna are also identical with Krishna, how may the name be regarded as the only means? This is true. But to the soul who happens to be under the thraldom of matter, the name alone is accessible. The form, quality, activity and servitorship are attainable in the order of enumeration by the method of taking the name without offense. This is not against reason, because the holy name alone is least liable of being wholly misunderstood by the fettered soul who submits to receive him from the lips of a sadhu for the purpose of serving him in the manner that is free from offense. It is for this reason that the question as to what constitutes the act of offense against the name becomes all important. The philanthropists who confound the soul with the material mind necessarily imagine that the name and the sadhus are also phenomena of this world, and, therefore, they are as a matter of course comprehensible by the material mind. This attitude of virtual refusal to recognize the divine nature of the holy name makes the recital of the name of Krishna by the philanthropists a meaningless mundane process which bears only an external resemblance to the service of the holy name by the devotee. The difference is of course not perceptible to the material mind, but it is, and must be, necessarily self-evident to the pure soul who has access to the substantive reality. It is also for this reason that philanthropists, who profess to be Vaishnavas, suppose that everyone has a right ab initio of realizing the form, quality and activity of Krishna and his own distinctive relationship to him as his servitor. On this supposition they engage in gross and sensual idolatry under the persuasion that it is identical with the religion enjoined by the Shastras and sanctioned by the actual practice of the most eminent devotees. From this error, if it has already taken a deep root, it is very difficult to extricate the offending soul. All the gross immoralities that are practiced in the name of religion in different parts of the world by certain classes of people, who are very anxious to keep their activities screened from the view of those who do not belong to their secret brotherhoods, are due to their neglect to chant the holy name of Krishna, heard from the lips of a real sadhu in the manner that is free from offense and under the direction of sadhus. The chanting of the transcendental name is the only admissible form of religion to fettered souls, as he is not capable of being grossly misrepresented. It is of course also possible to chant the name of Krishna in the offensive manner. But once we are put on our guard against the deliberate commission of such offense, we would naturally be unwilling to honor a person as a real sadhu unless he fully satisfied, at any rate to our judgment, enlightened by the chanting of the name, this crucial test of sainthood. The offense against the name is nothing short of willful misapprehension. We must not understand that the name or hearing or chanting of the name is a material phenomenon. We must insist on being fully satisfied that it is not really a material process that is being offered to us by any person wearing the external garb of a sadhu. We must always refer to the texts of the scriptures which uphold the spiritual view in the most uncompromising manner. Thus fortified, it should be possible for a sincere soul to detect every form of mischievous attempts of the cheats and hypocrites. A person has to thank only himself for being a victim to pseudo-sadhus. A person is similarly to blame only himself if he fails to find the real sadhu, or neglects to seek for him. When once a person attains the condition that entitles him to sing the name of Krishna in the manner that is free from offense, he finds that all his wants have been automatically fulfilled. For example, he is freed from all anxiety on his own personal account. He realizes that he is not any limited entity and that he is located beyond the jurisdiction of birth, death and wants. He obtains the vision which is capable of distinguishing between the real and the apparent. But as those who either belong to a lower level of the spiritual plane or do not belong to the spiritual plane at all, have not his perfect vision, they naturally fail to understand the true bearing of his activities. The activities of Thakur Haridas can be properly understood only by perfectly self-realized souls. All that we may affirm in reward to them at this place is that they show an utter forgetfulness of his material surroundings and an overpowering attachment to the holy name of Krishna. We have already seen that he was absolutely free from sexual weakness and was thoroughly versed in the principles of the Shastras. The idea regarding the real nature of his personality will be further elucidated by a careful consideration of the different aspects of the event that we are just going to describe. The Qazi or Muslim priest under the employ of the state, who was both priest and judge and looked after the Muslim religion, soon began to take an interest in the doings of Thakur Haridas. Being apprised of his antecedents and present behavior, he considered it necessary to bring the matter to the notice of the local governor. The Qazi went personally to the governor and told him everything about Thakur Haridas, concluding with the request that as Thakur Haridas was guilty of the offense of living as a Hindu, although he is a Mohammedan born, he should be dealt with in a decisive manner. The governor writes Thakur Brindavandas, who was himself also of a worldly disposition, on the representations of the misguided Qazi, ordered Thakur Haridas to be seized and brought before him at once. Haridas voluntarily offered to accompany the men dispatched to seize his person by violence and to appear before the governor. By the grace of Krishna, Thakur Haridas, says the author of the Chaitanya Bhagavata, was not afraid of death, not to speak of the Muslim ruler. Thakur Haridas, with the chant of the name of Krishna on his lips, set out immediately and presented himself before the governor. All the good people of Fulia, apprehending the worst, were filled with sorrow and dismay on being thus suddenly and violently deprived of his happy companionship. And now an incident occurred which throws much light on the true personality of Thakur Haridas. As soon as the tidings of the seizure of Haridas reached the prison of the governor, the leading persons of all those parts, who were confined in the jail at that time, experienced a great joy in the core of their hearts at the news. They thought, writes Thakur Brindavandas, that as Thakur Haridas was the greatest of Vaishnavas, the miseries of their captivity were sure to end by the sight of him. They accordingly persuaded their keepers to afford them an opportunity of obtaining a glimpse of the great devotee as he passed by the prison house. Those captives awaited the arrival of Thakur Haridas with their eyes fixed to the path by which he was to pass. Thakur Haridas came to the spot, and on catching sight of the prisoners he mentally cast the glance of mercy on them. The prisoners, fixing their eyes to the feet of Thakur Haridas, remained in the posture of obeisance. They saw that Thakur Haridas was surpassingly handsome. His hands reached down to the knee. His eyes were like the lotus flower. His incomparable moon-like face was, however, the most beautiful of all. All the prisoners bowed with a natural and loyal impulse of submissive devotion. They at once underwent the spiritual perturbations of devotion to Krishna. Lord Haridas noticed the devotional activity of them all, and finding that they were in chains, broke into a smile of mercy. "May you continue to remain in your present condition," said Thakur Haridas. He began to laugh merrily after pronouncing this veiled benediction. The prisoners, failing to comprehend the real meaning, which is, indeed, very difficult to understand, were somewhat depressed on hearing these words. Haridas Thakur was thereby moved to the mood of pity, and at once proceeded to explain clearly the import of his words. "I have indeed conveyed my concealed benediction to you all by means of those words. You feel dejected because you do not understand this. I never bless amiss. You will understand this if you give my words your close consideration. May the minds of all of you remain constantly turned towards Krishna as they actually are just now. May all of you from now jointly chant the eternal name of Krishna and think only of him. There is now no malice, no thought of oppressing any creature in your hearts. May you meditate on Krishna by taking his name with all humility. If you go into the world once more, you run the risk of forgetting him again by mixing with the worldly people. Love for Krishna cannot coexist with any form of worldliness. Know it for certain that from one who is of a worldly disposition, Krishna is always very far off. The mind, that is engrossed with the pursuit of the objects of this world, is a great nuisance. Wife, sons and all worldly objects are the toils of delusion. All these are death. It is by providential contrivance that any fortunate person gains real contact with the pure devotees of Godhead and, being thereby enabled to give up his attachment for the world, is in a position to devote himself to the service of Krishna. All those offenses that are now absent from your minds will once more be committed when you mix with the worldly people. It is the nature of this world. This is the gist of all that you require to be told for your benefit. Give it your most attentive hearing. I pronounced this great benediction which you misunderstood. It is not my desire that you may continue to remain in this state of captivity. Forget the world and take the name of Hari night and day. I pronounced this only benediction in a disguised form. Feel no dejection, no, not even for a moment. I see all persons who are really in the fetters of this world with the eye of pity. May all of you attain to firm devotion to Krishna. Have no anxiety. I assure you that you will be freed from your captivity in the course of 2 or 3 days. Whether you engage in ordinary worldly pursuits or wherever you be, never forget your present resolve by any means. Having sought to promote the true well-being of the prisoners in the above manner, Thakur Haridas proceeded on his way and duly presented himself before the governor of the district. The advice to the prisoners makes the position of Thakur Haridas clearer. It is necessary to chant the name of Krishna, to meditate on Krishna, instead of being engrossed in worldly pursuits. For this purpose the state of captivity is more favorable than the state of bodily freedom, provided one is really inclined towards Krishna. It is very difficult to remember Krishna in the midst of the 1001 preoccupations of the worldly life, Krishna and worldliness having no connection with one another, the two being perfectly incompatible. It is never possible to serve both. A worldly-minded person can have nothing to do with Krishna. It is never possible to worship Krishna in the intervals of worldliness. The slightest inclination to worldliness should be impossible to a person who is at all inclined to Krishna. It is necessary to understand clearly that as long as the least inclination for worldliness persists in our minds, there can be no love for Krishna. The society of worldly people has this tendency of making us wholly forget Krishna. Wife and children are cited as instances of the deadly traps that are laid by the delusive energy for encompassing our ruin. The attachment for wife and children and other worldly objects can be overcome only by association with the sadhus. In the company of the sadhus our attachments are deflected towards Krishna. Therefore, Haridas properly enough exhorts the prisoners to forget the world completely and chant the name of Krishna night and day. The function of the soul, who is anxious to be restored to his natural condition of loving devotion to the lotus feet of Krishna, is very simple. One must willingly turn his thoughts and activities towards Krishna. He can do so most naturally by association with the devotees of Krishna. The devotees of Krishna always serve Krishna and do nothing else. By adopting their life under their direction, love for Krishna is gradually aroused in the fettered soul. Attachment for the world is automatically dispelled by the dimmest apprehension of such inclination, as darkness is dispelled by the glow of the reflected light that harbingers the approach of sunrise. The cultivation of association with the devotees is the only method of attaining to the natural function of the soul, viz., unalloyed love for Krishna. This inclination for the society of sadhus, which is inherent in every soul, is liable to be rendered ineffective by association with worldly people. Pure devotees and worldly people and worldly objects generally present themselves simultaneously and claim our service as rivals. We cannot choose both. If we choose one of them, we completely lose sight of the other. They are related to one another as darkness and light. The light of this phenomenal world imperceptibly shades off into darkness, so that it is not possible to fix a line of real demarcation between the two. But the darkness of the non-spiritual state has a definite line of demarcation. Until this line is passed, we can have absolutely no idea of the spiritual state. A better analog from this point of view is furnished by the case of life and death. Death is not an attenuation of life. It is the complete cessation of life. We cannot have both simultaneously. It is not possible to mix up the two. It is also possible to ascertain perfectly the dividing line between the two. A dying person is a living person to the last moment that he retains his animation in however attenuated a form. When he dies, he passes completely out of life. The smallest fraction of a second makes a complete rupture, not merely a graduated difference. A dead man cannot also come into life again. This is the reason why the acceptance of a person as disciple by the spiritual guide has been called the second birth. The seminal birth does not give the spiritual life. One is spiritually dead till the second birth. One is born a third time on receiving the full enlightenment of Diksha. The first is the seminal birth, the second is initiation or admission for enlightenment, the third birth is brought about when one attains to the state of actual enlightenment. The first is the condition of spiritual death, the second is the quasi-living state, the third is the normal living condition. One who has any real experience of life and death cannot prefer death to life. Neither can he plead for an unnatural and impossible mixture of the two. We must not suppose that we are asked to accept anything blindly when we are told to accept the life that was actually led by Thakur Haridas. If anyone shouts the name of Krishna 3 or any number of lakhs of times every day and abstains from open debauchery or detectable forms of gross worldliness, he cannot thereby mechanically attain to the spiritual plane. It is not mechanical, nor even mental, activities and attitudes that we are asked to adopt. As soon as the name of Krishna manifests himself to our spiritual ear, we obtain the power of vision that can distinguish between the substance and the shadow. The shadow now no longer stands in the way of our dealings with the substance. Those who are under the misapprehension that the shadow is everything and behave and think accordingly cannot at all understand the ways of the devotee of Godhead. The very idea of service is incomprehensible to the material mind. The material mind is connected by the relationship of the deluded pseudo-enjoyer to the objects that lie exposed to the physical senses. It misconceives certain forms of such enjoyment to be service. It thinks that its very existence is dependent on and consists of such enjoyment. Therefore, whenever it finds anybody behaving on a different principle, it judges him consistently enough to be in the wrong and his course as suicidal. While the real truth is that the judge himself is all the time pursuing the course that leads to death, while the sadhu has his face eternally turned towards the life eternal. How can one live at all unless one eats and tries to procure food, clothing and shelter? Thakur Haridas also, it is supposed, required all these necessaries of life. Once this is admitted, it follows that one must lead the worldly life as a matter of course. But Thakur Haridas says that nothing is necessary except taking the name of Krishna. If he is asked why he himself eats, drinks, sleeps and does other kinds of work in the same way as another person, he simply replies that he does nothing of the kind. The objection may prefer to believe the testimony of his senses and consider Thakur Haridas to be a shameless liar. It is of course perfectly open to him to do so. But even by disbelieving Haridas, he does not establish the truth of his own contention. All that is proved is that if both of them are assumed to tell the truth, their points of view must be admitted to differ widely. This brings us back to a re-examination of the bases on which they take their respective stand. If we do so without bias, we should be impressed by the conviction that the method of Thakur Haridas may lead us to the truth, but the method of the mentalist can never do so. True, we may pretend to stick to that course into which we suppose we have been born by the will of Godhead. But what right have we to suppose that the phenomena of birth and death themselves may not be as deceptive as any other similar phenomenon? So the question cannot be solved if we choose merely to stick to the testimony of our deluding senses on the ground that it happens to be so. If it be our foregone conclusion to adopt that course which seems more likely to enable us to exploit for our transitory pleasure the questionable so-called facilities offered by this world, we do not admittedly approach the issue for the impartial purpose of finding out the truth before our conclusion is declared. If by taking the name of Krishna in the manner that is free from offense the senses themselves are transformed, why should it be still necessary for us to obey the dictates of the old, non-spiritual faculties? If I actually can see that it is Godhead himself who always feeds and clothes me, why should I still consider it my duty to maintain it is I who feed and clothe myself? If I clearly realize my blunder, why should it still be my duty to stick to it? One who tries to mechanically imitate Thakur Haridas without possessing his vision and purpose should find it impossible and inconvenient to imitate his whole conduct, as will be evident from the incident that we are going to describe just now. After endeavoring to compass the good of the prisoners, Thakur Haridas made his way to the presence of the governor. The governor was fascinated by the extraordinary charm and force of personality of Thakur Haridas. He accordingly offered him a seat with the greatest respect. The ruler of the mulk himself then questioned him. The questions of the governor have been preserved by Thakur Brindavandas in his account of Sri Caitanya. The governor said in effect, "Brother, what is the cause of this peculiar disposition in you? It is no small good fortune whereby you have been born a Yavana. Why then do you incline to the practices of the Hindus? We don't touch our food if we but chance to see a Hindu. Why do you give up the superiority that accrues to you by your birth in our great race? You behave unnaturally by transgressing against your race and religion. You cannot hope to escape the dire consequences of such gross offense, at any rate in the next world. The malpractices of which you have been guilty through ignorance are a sin against Godhead. By all means do get absolved from these heinous offenses by uttering the formula, kalma, of the faith. Thakur Brindavandas comments on the speech of the governor as proceeding from a person whose judgment was stupefied by the deluding energy of Godhead. Haridas only burst into a loud laughter. Lo, the deluding power of Vishnu, said he, and then began to reply in a sweet manner. Listen, dear one, there is only one Godhead and he is the Lord of everything. It is the mere concocted name that makes all the difference between Hindu and Yavana. The Veda and the Quran alike declare the summum bonum to be one and the same for all. The one eternal entity, free from all defect, indivisible and indestructible, occupies fully the seat of heart of everyone. All the worlds function exactly in the way in which the one Supreme Lord guides the minds of his servitors. It is the name and quality of the selfsame Lord on whom all persons discourse in conformity with the declarations of their respective scriptures. He, who is Godhead, takes cognizance of the disposition that prompts the utterances of all persons. Whence I am doing exactly that very thing to which Godhead directs my mind. It is analogous to the conduct of a person who, being a Brahmana and born in the Hindu community, is sometimes found to become a Yavana by his own free choice. What can even being a Hindu avail such a person? The deeds of every person are entirely his own concern. What is the good of killing a person who has himself committed suicide? Good sir, judge my case accordingly. If there be no real lapse on my part, do by all means punish me for my offense. These wholesome and true words of Thakur Haridas satisfied all the Yavanas who heard them. There was, however, one solitary exception. An ecclesiastic, Qazi, who was a great offender against Godhead, now tendered quite different advice to the governor. He said to the governor, punish this person. This wicked one will lead many others into his folly. He will bring low the prestige of the Yavana race. For this reason let him be punished in all seriousness. As an alternative let him recite his own scriptures. On this the governor spoke once more to Haridas, dear brother, profess your own Shastra and be relieved of all anxiety. If you do not do so all the ecclesiastics will band together and punish you. You yourself will also say your own Shastra in the long run. Then what is the good of your choosing to be lowered in the estimation of the people? Haridas said, no one can do anything else than what Godhead makes him do. No, it is certain that it is Godhead who awards the punishment that is the fruit of offense committed by ourselves. If my body be hacked to pieces, if life itself desert me, even then I will not give up the name of Hari. The ruler of the place, on hearing his words, put the issue to the ecclesiastics. What will you do to him now? The Muslim ecclesiastic, Qazi, gave his verdict. Let him be whipped at the 22 marketplaces. Take his life without any hesitation. If he survives the beating at the 22 markets, then I should be prepared to admit the truth of what the sages have declared. I have tried to reproduce the actual wording of Sri Brindavanda's account of the famous trial of Thakur Haridas. We should now try to put ourselves into the attitude of the saintly narrator in order to be able to understand the real meaning of his words. But before we proceed to do so it is necessary to offer a few remarks as regards the canon by which the authenticity of a statement is to be tested. It is not the practice in the conventional history to use the method of direct narration unless the words actually spoken can be reproduced verbatim, and even in such case it is very rarely, indeed, that recourse is had to this direct method. In the biographies of Sri Caitanya penned by Thakur Brindavandas and other contemporaries and followers, the method of recording the speeches of the actors has been used very frequently, and the followers of the Lord accept the version of the biographies as the actual language used by Sri Caitanya himself. The value of the actual words used by the speaker is even greater in the case of theistic history than in secular narrative. In theistic history only the actual words of the devotees convey the full meaning intended by them. The words are living entities. This is the reason why these authors are so careful to give us the actual words of the devotees whose views they record. In this connection we should remember that the method that is being followed in the compilation of the present work is not the empiric method of induction cum deduction, but that of manifestation of the truth in the form of the articulated transcendental sound. In this method the value of every single word, actually spoken by the devotee, is worth preserving, and the original text is therefore all important. It is possible for the devotee of Godhead to supply us with the actual words of the divinity. The slightest deviation from the divine language is also for the same reason detectable by the devotee. The language in the form of direct narration is, therefore, not a departure from the truth in this case, but the closest adherence to him. In the form of indirect narration, the writer's personality is the obtruding and dominating factor. In theistic history, the personal equation should be non-existent, and, therefore, its indirect narration should also be acceptable in proportion as it approximates the direct form. This is also the reason why quotations of actual texts are so much esteemed in the theistic method of narration. Sri Jiva Goswami Prabhu has tried to clothe his highest conclusions in the language of the scriptures. The method of Sri Jiva Goswami is a part and parcel of his function as the real exponent of the Absolute. If it be urged why it is necessary also to preserve the actual words of the opponents of the devotees, as has been done in this case, the explanation is that the words of a person who is adverse to Godhead, when directed to the devotee of Godhead even by way of opposition, do no longer point to the mundane objective, and for this reason acquire special value for the instruction of novices. Nothing can purely express one's personality except the words spoken by the person himself. The indirect method of narration is due to the inability of the writer to understand the real character of a person with sufficient distinctness. There need be no categorical distinction between the dramatic or conversational form and that of indirect narration, which has found so great favor, by reason of its very insufficiency, in all so-called serious compositions of these days. The indirect narration is suitable as medium of expression in the case of inanimate objects or when the narrative is intentionally converted into a monologue. Either of these, if properly used in place of the other, would be a deviation from the truth, and would, therefore, be inadmissible, unless required for the purpose of expressing the truth. To proceed with our narrative, the issue that was put before the governor by the Qazi and used by him in punishing Thakur Haridas is by no means so crude and unimportant as it may appear to a moderner to whom religious toleration is supposed to be as the very breath of his nostrils. The Qazi said that as the Muslim community are upholders of the truth, who can be but one, they have a right to convert others to their faith by any method, even by force, for the good of all parties. In case of extreme perversity, the true believer has also the benevolent right, on the same principle, of even putting an end to the earthly existence of a person who sets himself in opposition to the truth, for vindicating the supreme necessity, on the part of all lovers of the truth, of supporting the cause of the truth at all costs to prevent any misunderstanding. If cognizance is to be taken at all of any lapse from the truth, no sentence that will not maintain the claim of the truth to our fullest allegiance under all circumstances can be a true verdict. Those who do not profess to be the exclusive servants of the absolute truth need find no difficulty in practicing the duty of tolerating untruth without losing their self-complacence. But the real lover of the absolute cannot hasten to make terms with untruth in order to satisfy the tendency of aversion to truth that is eternally inherent in the very nature of the dissociable particles of the divine essence, viz., the jiva souls. The uncompromising and even violent or impatient opposition of a lover of the truth to all suggestions of the lower self, who is always whispering into his ears the counsels of disloyalty, may appear to be intolerable to one who is complacently disposed towards the pernicious tendency, but should not be justified on this ground by those who are not also themselves disloyal. Thakur Haridas did not blame the Qazi and the governor for their intolerance of untruth, but for their hallucination which led them to mistake their own disloyalty to the truth for the undoubtedly good quality of uncompromising loyalty. Intolerance, said Thakur Haridas, is impossible for one who is really a lover of Godhead. Such a person can naturally blame nobody excepting himself when he finds anything to be wrong. There can be no activity on any plane except by the will of Godhead. If any activity is blamed or praised, it shows the disposition to judge the doings of Godhead himself. Any thought against any person is nothing short of malice against Godhead himself. The scriptures themselves are also not really different from one another if they are rightly understood. Those who do not understand their real meaning are alone disposed to differentiate between the scriptures and revealed forms of worship which are all directed to the one Godhead. The question of religious toleration is a matter of the highest practical importance. Those who maintain the doctrine of intolerance of untruth can only be properly answered by the higher doctrine of the realization of the hand of the Supreme Lord in everything, except in the matter of the individual judgment. The soul can really do no wrong. Godhead is solely responsible for all activities of the world. The soul can be deluded and, in the state of delusion only, he can imagine right and wrong. This deluded condition is full of misery for the soul himself, and for this he should be an object of pity. The deluded soul is, however, deluded also by the will of Godhead. Therefore, the delusion cannot be blamed. The cause of the deluded state is inherent in the jiva soul as the necessary condition of his dissociable individual existence. It is, no doubt, necessary to get rid of the deluded state, but it is not possible to bring this about by a policy of violence. As soon as one is disposed to be violent, he is subjected by his own activity to the delusion that he, or anybody else except Godhead, is responsible for the ordering of this world. And if one persists in acting under such delusion, he is himself deluded by his own acts. This is the meaning of the Quran. Those who imagine that the delusion is cured by putting the unbeliever to death are themselves deluded. The only way in which one can help both oneself and others is by trying to avoid falling under the delusion that anybody except Godhead can do anything either good or bad. There is nothing good or bad, but our disloyal thinking makes it so. The policy of real toleration is not inconsistent with, but on the other hand indispensable for, the relation of the true service of Godhead. The toleration that is disposed to dally with untruth is inconsistent with loyalty, is really due to aversion to the truth, and is, therefore, more disastrous in its consequences than intolerance of untruth which it pretends to condemn. The policy of sincere intolerance of untruth, although it is better than disloyal tolerance of untruth, is thus itself a mischievous delusion. The chaste and loyal wife may consider it her duty not only to cut off the connection with all unchaste women but to revile and punish them for their misconduct. But if those unchaste women could be reclaimed by a policy of milder firmness, their husbands would have real cause to thank this loyal wife of another person for her benevolent and really kind disposition. This would certainly be no neglect of her duty towards her own husband. We crave the kind indulgence of the reader to tolerate an unhappy metaphor to elucidate the position of the loyal servant of Krishna, which cannot be fully explained by our defective vocabulary. The unchaste wives, in the case of spiritual service, have really also no other husbands than Krishna. They are, therefore, the co-wives of the loyal matron. It should, therefore, be a duty of the chaste wife towards her husband to try her best to reclaim the unchaste ladies. If the chaste wife does not do this, she is herself proved to be disloyal to her husband to that extent. Krishna is not pleased by the malice of loveless fanatics any more than by the covert disloyalty of pseudo-latitudinarians. Fanaticism is due to ignorance of the perfect nature of Krishna and of our common relationship with him. It is also a proof of our want of faith in the dispensation of the Supreme Lord. It is of course absolutely necessary to keep wholly aloof from all unbelievers in the matter of loyalty to Krishna. But this should be coupled with the desire to benefit the deluded souls by trying to win them over to the service of Krishna. This duty, as the present episode shows, cannot be neglected with impunity without producing the most tragic results. The fanatical Qazi could dupe those who were maliciously disposed like himself to join with him in practicing terrible oppression on a devoted servant of Godhead, on the strength of a narrow interpretation of certain texts of the Quran condemnatory of association with unbelievers. Those passages, if rightly understood, are a condemnation of disloyalty to Godhead. But malice towards any creature, as Thakur Haridas took care to point out, is malice against Godhead himself, and such disloyalty is not less condemnable than any of the other more familiar forms of that pernicious tendency. Loyalty to Krishna necessarily means perfect toleration, nay perfect positive goodwill, towards all creatures good and bad. Nothing less than this can satisfy Krishna. But perfect toleration or goodwill towards the misguided soul need not be perversely supposed to mean either toleration or sympathy for the motive that lies behind the conduct of such a person. There can be no toleration of the tendency to untruth. There must be perfect toleration of the activities of misguided persons, as Krishna does not cherish any ill will against them, nay permits those activities with the object of effecting their reclamation thereby. Loyalty to Krishna should express itself by serving the perfect goodwill of Krishna towards all creatures and realizing the mercy of Godhead in the activities, as distinct from the motive of even those persons who are most averse to Krishna. Those who find fault with the activities of unbelievers from malice forget that those activities are possible only by the sanction of Krishna, and that by one's malicious opposition of those activities it is Krishna against whom our malice is really directed. That this must be so is proved by the fiendish persecution that was now launched against Thakur Haridas. Therefore, the excuse that, as it is not possible to distinguish between a believer and unbeliever except by conduct and profession, and as it is our duty to Krishna to discourage disloyalty to him by all means in our power, the persecution of Haridas can be defended as being due to a strong sense of loyalty to Godhead, is wholly untenable. Krishna can be properly served only when we possess the knowledge of his real nature. Krishna does not want us to discourage disloyalty to him by hypocritically or maliciously opposing his wise and benevolent method for the reclamation of disloyal persons. In other words, fanaticism is the result of culpable ignorance due to a radically disloyal and unserving disposition. Recourse to violence, either physical, mental or spiritual, is directly opposed to the purpose of Krishna, because violence is powerless against the soul who, being the essence of Krishna, possesses his perfect freedom of will. The freedom of will of the soul is indestructible. He can be reclaimed only by an appeal to his judgment and free will. Those who advocate the policy of violence are far away from Krishna and perfectly ignorant of the nature of their own selves. Faith in Krishna is the natural attitude of the pure soul. Fanaticism is the hypocritical and malicious caricature of spiritual faith by the soul in the state of utter delusion. Fanaticism, being essentially an attitude of opposition to Krishna, is also necessarily intolerant of all loyal servants of the Supreme Lord. It is not by accident that the fanatics crucified Jesus. The fanatics can never tolerate the goodwill of Krishna towards all his creatures. They pretend to show their love for Krishna by hating his loved ones. The fanatics are bound to hate everybody because they really hate the Supreme Lord himself. They, therefore, also hate those who are averse to Krishna, not from a sense of loyalty to Krishna but because they themselves are unmindful of the service of Krishna and want everybody to serve them. Fanaticism always kindles counter-fanaticism in those of its victims who happen to be equally averse to Krishna. But it is powerless to move the servant of Godhead to thoughts of malice against his deluded oppressors. By command of the governor, wicked ruffians laid violent hands on Thakur Haridas. They beat him most ferociously from market to put an end to the least sign of life. Haridas remembered to repeat the name of Krishna. There was no manifestation of bodily pain by the bliss of the name. All good men experienced boundless grief on witnessing the utmost severity of the beating that was inflicted on the person of Haridas. Some apprehended the ruin of the whole kingdom from such treatment of a good person in view of the people. Others openly expressed their indignation against king and minister. There was some display of actual violent opposition also. Intimidation was combined with the offer of bribes to soften the harshness of those ruffians. But all was to no purpose. They beat him severely from market to market. Haridas did not experience the least bodily pain by the grace of Krishna, even under such ferocious castigation. Thakur Brindavandas compares his condition to that of the great devotee, the child Prahlada, who passed unscathed through all hurt inflicted by the atheists, asuras. The writer assures his readers that inasmuch as one who remembers Haridas is thereby delivered completely from the possibility of all bodily pain, it is no wonder that Haridas himself was also perfectly immune from all such pain on this occasion. Those who suppose that the above is the exaggerated version of a petty incident, or may be disposed to minimize or explain away its real significance, are perfectly free to do so. It is not also impossible to adduce instances of the marvelous powers of endurance of the worst of criminals under deserved chastisement. The story of Prahlada may itself be dismissed as a concoction of the fertile imagination of writers who find a senile pleasure only in praising deeds of transcendental performances. The sedulous cultivation of a taste for the supernatural is also supposed to be that unfortunate trait in the Indian character that distinguishes the Hindus even in the 20th century from the saner peoples of every other part of the world. It is for this reason that foreign writers, who are really well disposed towards the Indians, find themselves at the end of their resources to invent a suitable apology for this favorite defect of the narrators of the Indian spiritual traditions that are cherished with the utmost tenacity and reverence by this strange people. If instead of allowing ourselves to be obsessed by our indigenous or foreign prejudices we stop to consider seriously the version of the event from the pen of the contemporaneous writer in order to arrive at the truth that he is anxious to impress on our minds, we should not fail to be struck by certain very remarkable points in the above narrative. In the first place, it is evidently not the intention of the writer to arouse animosity against the Yavanas. Had this been his real object, he would not have taken the trouble of insisting on the point that Haridas actually suffered no pain. Neither could it also be the object of the writer to praise Haridas for his courage or power of endurance. In fact, he does not want to praise any worldly merit or condemn any worldly demerit. He is wholly indifferent to such issues which alone possess any interest for the secular historian. Thakur Brindavandas is trying to understand the experiences of Haridas in terms of his own. What he means to say in effect is this: I, who have been immune from all bodily pain by the mere recollection of Haridas, am in a position to testify to the fact that neither he nor Prahlada can ever really be subject to bodily pain. So it is necessary to understand what the writer really means. If it be asked why others are not similarly relieved of their sufferings by the mere recollection of Haridas, why were not those people, who had an opportunity of actually witnessing all these events, instantly relieved of all anxiety on his account by the very sight of him, which should not be regarded as less than recollection? Thakur Brindavandas could realize that the devotee of Krishna is not a convict who is put in the prison of this world of three dimensions like ordinary worldly people. The difficulties of three dimensions are automatically solved on the plane of four dimensions, although this may pass the understanding of those who are privileged to have a view of events on the plane of four dimensions from their platform of three dimensions without being able to dive into their real meaning. By taking the name of Krishna, one is relieved from all worldly sufferings. If one chooses to stick to his platform of three dimensions, he cannot, merely by uttering the word Krishna, avoid the sufferings of this world. The sufferings of the body are a part and parcel of the phenomenal world. The soul does not belong to the phenomenal world and is, therefore, not subject to bodily sufferings. This is logical. But how can this be actually realized in practice? It can be realized in this world by only one method, viz., by uttering constantly the spiritual name of Krishna. This is divinely ordained, as there cannot be any mere logical way out of this insuperable difficulty. The devotee of Krishna is relieved from all bodily and mental suffering by the realization of his natural condition, viz., that of the soul. The tree is to be judged by its fruit. If by uttering the name of Krishna one is not wholly relieved from all worldly trouble, he cannot claim to have succeeded in taking the holy name. It is only the pure soul who can really utter the name of Krishna. It is only by uttering the name of Krishna, by listening to the same from the lips of a devotee, that one can attain to one's natural spiritual condition when alone he is fit to take the name of Krishna. It is only by getting out of the sphere of three dimensions or any dimensions that all unwholesomeness can be finally, logically and naturally eliminated. Those who pray to Godhead to give them the power of endurance under trial commit a great blunder. Those who pray to be permitted to serve Godhead on the plane of the Absolute by His causeless grace alone pray truly. Prayer means unconditional reliance on the grace of Godhead. The grace of Godhead is perfectly wholesome and need not be reminded of our wrong aspirations by the method of selfish, criminal insistence for their dire fulfillment. Those who pray in order to gain any object of their present ambition do not pray at all in the scriptural sense. The grace of Godhead will revolutionize our limited outlook and impart other ambitions than those that are giving us such interminable and unrelievable trouble. Those ruffians and onlookers who were interested in the fate of Haridas were all of them equally misguided in supposing that a devotee is subject to bodily sufferings like themselves. It is to prove by his teaching as well as conduct that he is not subject to any worldly suffering that Thakur Haridas was displaying those activities in order to induce them to believe in the absolute truth of what he taught. He, who has himself attained to real immunity from all suffering, is the proper person to be approached as a teacher of the true method for attaining to the free state. Those ruffians and onlookers were apparently innocent of any such purpose, except a very few who were led to reflect seriously on the real meaning for themselves of those events. So the mere sight of a Vaishnava under the impression that he is only a mortal, or the mere recollection of a Vaishnava viewed as a mortal, are properly speaking not seeing or recollecting him at all. The Vaishnava can be really seen and recollected only on the plane of the Absolute by the pure eye of faith possessed by the soul in the state of grace. The recollection of such a sight has the efficacy of freeing from all difficulties. The endeavor to attain such sight and recollection is the spiritual practice available to the novice by the grace of the spiritual teacher. The process of spiritual novitiate under a pure devotee is not ignored by the words of Thakur Brindavandas. The novitiate itself being also spiritual in character cannot be attained in this iron age except by the method of perfect submission to the teachings of Thakur Haridas and of those who are privileged to see as well as remember him as he really is. He is the Akriya of this age of evil. By following his teaching and practice one can be easily freed from every difficulty. There is no other way of our final and true liberation. Chapters Ksi, Thakur Haridas Kant. Thakar Haridas experienced only one kind of pain while he was undergoing ferocious beating at the hands of the minions of the Muslim governor. He felt sorry for those sinners who were involved in this terrible offense against himself. He prayed to Krishna to do him this favor that those miscreants might not incur the divine displeasure by reason of their ferocious cruelty towards himself. Those Yavanas, however, continued to beat him severely from marketplace to marketplace with the resolve of putting an end to his life. They beat him with all the strength they had. Haridas had no memory of his mental body and was perfectly immune from any sensation of suffering which was actually inflicted on his physical body. Neither did he die. The Yavanas now experienced a sense of surprise in their minds. They thought in this way, can the life of a mortal survive such beating? The life of a man is extinguished by beating at 2, or at most 3, marketplaces. We have already beat him at no less than 22 marketplaces. Not only does he not die, but the wonder of all wonders, he actually smiles now and then. All of them were filled with a terrible misgiving. Was this person after all the pur that people claim him to be? At last the Yavanas put their own plight before Thakar Haridas. They said, Haridas, you will be the cause of the death of all of us. We have beaten you to the best of our ability. But although we are fatigued to death by our severe exertions, life still refuses to quit your body. It will now be the turn of the Qazi to punish us. He will take the lives of all of us. This pathetic and strange protest made Thakar Haridas laugh as he said, if my being alive be the cause of mishap to all of you, mark me well, I will die just now before your eyes. Saying so, Thakar Haridas became absorbed in the contemplation of Krishna. Haridas, observes Thakar Brindavandas, is possessed of all power. He became perfectly inert and there was no sign of the breathing activities in any part of his body. The sight of this phenomenon filled the Yavanas with great astonishment. They conveyed Thakar Haridas to the steps of the entrance of the governor's residence. The governor then gave the command, let him have a burial. The Qazi opposed. He said, he will fare well after death if he is given the benefit of burial. Being born in a superior faith, he stooped to accept a low creed. He should be dealt with in accordance with the gravity of the offense. It will benefit his soul if his body is allowed a burial. Let his body be, therefore, cast into the river so that he may be doomed to eternal misery. At these words of the Qazi, all the Yavanas caught hold of the body of Thakar Haridas with intent to cast him into the Ganges. Thakar Haridas now sat upright in the bliss of divine contemplation, and as he did so, Viswamdhar, who upholds the whole world, manifested his presence in his body. The presence of Viswamdhar made it out of the question for anyone to move the body of Thakar Haridas. Mighty men pushed the body from every side. Lord Haridas remained immovable like a great tower. Haridas had been perfectly immersed in the deep nectarine ocean of Krishna bliss, and there had been no manifestation of any external consciousness. Haridas had not known whether he was on dry ground, in the air above the ground, or in the water of the Ganges. The devotion to Krishna, manifested in the recollection of Krishna by Prahlada, is the only parallel to that of Thakar Haridas. Thakar Haridas's conduct is also comparable to that of Hanuman, the servant of Sri Ramachandra, who submitted to be fettered by the Rakshasas of his own accord, out of deference to Brahma. It is in the like spirit that Haridas accepted the beating of the Yavanas, for the instruction of the world. That teaching is to be found in his words, if my sufferings know no end, if life itself leaves my body, yet will I not give up uttering the name of Hari with my mouth. This constant loyalty to the name is the teaching of this most wonderful exhibition of devotion by Thakar Haridas. Is it otherwise possible for anyone to attempt any harm against Haridas, whose protector is Govinda himself? All suffering is instantly ended by the recollection of Thakar Haridas. How can, therefore, any suffering be inflicted on Haridas himself? Let no one doubt that Haridas is verily the Iswara, divine ruler, of the world, one of the foremost of the greatest associates of Chaitanya Chandra himself. Then Thakar Haridas exhibited the Leela of being cast into the water of the Ganges by the Yavanas and lay afloat on the bosom of the holy stream. By the will of Godhead, Thakar Haridas soon regained his external consciousness. He then came out of the water and got to the bank of the river, experiencing all the while the fullness of the transcendental bliss. In that manner he came on to the town of Fulia, continuing to chant loudly the name of Krishna. The Yavanas, as they witnessed this wonderful exhibition of his power, were cured of their malice against him, and their minds were purified. All bowed to him with humility, being convinced that he was, indeed, the pur. All these Yavanas thus received their deliverance. When Thakar Haridas recovered his external consciousness, he found the Muslim governor in presence of him. This made Thakur Haridas smile as he was moved to mercy. The governor reverentially responded, with palms joined in the act of supplication, I now know most certainly that you are a great pur. You have realized the knowledge of the One. People claim to be in touch with the Supreme Soul, to possess the knowledge of Him. But they only use their mouths to utter empty words. You have alone attained the realization in very truth. I have personally come down here to have a sight of you. Have mercy on me, Great One. May you be pleased to forgive my offenses. All are equal in your sight. You have neither friend nor foe. There is no person in all the three worlds who can know what you are. May you proceed auspiciously anywhere of your own free choice and continue to stay in your solitary cell on the bank of the Ganges. You may abide at whatever place you choose and do whatever you like at your own sweet will. Commenting on this change of heart of his oppressors, Thakur Brindavandas observes that if even those Yavana miscreants could forget their animosity at the sight of the holy feet of Thakur Haridas, what to speak of those people who are endowed with a natural goodness of disposition. The change of heart was, indeed, quite marvelous. Those Yavanas had come forward in the greatest anger to beat him to death. They recognized him as pur and threw themselves at his feet in the end. Thakur Haridas bestowed on the Yavanas his glance of mercy as he came on to Fulia. Thakur Haridas now presented himself again to the assembly of the Brahmanas of Fulia, in the act of chanting the name of Hari with a loud voice. As they caught sight of Thakur Haridas, those Brahmanas of Fulia experienced in their minds the bliss that transcends all joys of this world. Those Brahmanas spontaneously burst into chanting the name of Hari. Haridas danced with joy in their midst. The spiritual perturbations of Haridas pass all attempt at description. There were manifest tears, shivering, laughter, swooning, horripilation, thundering ejaculation. Haridas would often tumble down headlong on the ground by the melting quality of the liquid mellowness of love. The Brahmana swam on the current of a great joy on seeing these edifying exhibitions of love. As Haridas became quiet and sat still after a while, the Brahmanas also seated themselves in a circle round him. Haridas then spoke these words to the Brahmanas, O ye Brahmanas, cherish no sorrow on my account. This has been condemned punishment for me who have heard endless blasphemy against the Lord. It has been all very well, indeed. It has been a source of very great satisfaction to me that the Lord has been pleased to pardon a great offense by awarding such light punishment. One is doomed to the sufferings of the lowest hell by the offense of listening to blasphemy against Vishnu. With my vile ears I have heard a good deal of the same. The Lord has awarded the just punishment for that offense, so that it may not be committed by me again. In this manner Haridas passed the time in the company of those Brahmanas in the great joy of the congregational chant of Hari, while all those Yavanas, who had given him pain, were utterly ruined. They were destroyed with their families in a short time. Haridas now lived in his cell in the bank of the Ganges. He lived in seclusion by constant recollection of Krishna. He took 3 lakhs of the holy name every day. The cave became to him even as the realm of Vaikuntha. Inside that cave there also lived a huge serpent. The extremely venomous quality of its poison vitiated the atmosphere of the cave so that no one could bear the burning sensation that was experienced on entering the cave. None of those who came to have a sight of Thakur Haridas could bear to stay in the cave. They all felt the burning effect of the most virulent poison. But Haridas on his part was not aware of it at all. All those Brahmanas then met together and talked about it among themselves. They could not understand why there was such a great burning sensation in the cell of Haridas. There lived in Fulia persons who were skilled in the treatment of poisoning by snake bite. They made the discovery that the sensation was due to the presence of some extremely venomous snake within the cave. They informed the people about it and said that it was advisable for Thakur Haridas to quit the cave without delay and shift to some safe place. Accordingly the people went up to Thakur Haridas and implored him earnestly to leave that cave. But Thakur Haridas said that he did not experience any inconvenience personally, although he had been there for a very long time. However, if they really felt it to be unbearable, he was willing to move out of the cave the next day if the serpent did not shift elsewhere by that time, provided he was there at all, adding that there was, however, no cause for any anxiety and bade them to proceed with Krishna talk. As the people continued their auspicious discourse about Krishna, a most wonderful event came to pass then and there. On hearing that Haridas was to leave the cave, the great serpent at once quitted his abode. In the approaching gloom of that very evening the huge reptile came out of its hole and moved off from the cell in the view of all the people. It was a most beautiful creature, most wonderful to see and most deadly, spotted with yellow, blue, and white. A great gem burnt on the top of its hood. The Brahmanas were struck with a great fear at the sight of the serpent and involuntarily recollected the name of Krishna. As the serpent left the place, there was no longer any trace of the burning sensation that its presence had caused. The Brahmanas felt a great joy on being relieved of the presence of the brute in that wonderful manner. They conceived a great regard for Thakur Haridas on witnessing this exhibition of his great power. It is a small proof of the power of Thakur Haridas that the huge snake left the place at his mere word. By the very sight of Thakur Haridas, the bondage of nescience is snapped at once. Krishna does not oppose the word of Thakur Haridas. The above incident is recorded in the work of Thakur Brindavandas. Another story regarding the greatness of Thakur Haridas is also recorded by the same writer. It runs as follows. One day at the residence of a wealthy person of Fulia, a certain snake-bite healer was performing a musical dance when Thakur Haridas arrived there by accident and stood on one side to witness the dance. There now appeared the prince of the Nagas, by the force of the mantra taking its effect, in the person of the dancing snake-bite healer, and began to dance in that human form. He sang in a loud key the moving song of pity of the dance that was enacted by the Lord of Dancers in the lake of Kalya. On hearing the song of glory of his own Lord, Haridas fell down in a swoon and there was no sign of breath in any part of his body. Regaining his consciousness in a short time, he gave expression to his joy in thundering ejaculations and began to dance rapturously in an infinite variety of figures. The snake-bite healer, on beholding the spiritual possession of Thakur Haridas, stood still on one side of the arena. Thakur Haridas rolled on the ground decked in the wonderful manifestations of tears, horripilation and shivering. The great Thakur Haridas was filled with the presence of Krishna by listening to the chant of the goodness of his Lord and burst into weeping. All the assembled people now sang the chant of Krishna, forming a ring round Haridas. The snake-bite healer looked on from one side with the palms of his hands joined in the attitude of humble supplication. The spiritual trance of Haridas lasted for a short time. On its termination, the snake-bite healer resumed his dance. All the people were filled with great joy by witnessing the trance of Thakur Haridas. All the people now began to rub their bodies with the dust of every place that was touched by the feet of Thakur Haridas. There happened to be present in that crowd a hypocritical Brahmana who now conceived the fancy of performing a similar dance, under the impression that foolish and civilized people evince the highest devotion for even an insignificant person if he but dances. As soon as this thought flashed across the brain of this Brahmana, he forthwith fell prostrate on the ground and appeared as if bereft of all power of movement. But no sooner did he fall in this manner inside the arena of the performance of the dance of the snake-bite healer than the latter at once began to beat him violently in a frenzy of anger. He began to beat him so ferociously on the head and shoulders and on all sides of his body with his big cane that the Brahmana was in imminent danger of being killed outright by the violence of his repeated blows. The Brahmana, groaning with pain under the merciless caning, fled from the spot screaming, "O Father!" Thereafter the snake-bite healer danced for a long while, feeling all along a great delight. This strange conduct of the snake-bite healer filled the people with a great curiosity. With palms joined in supplication, they begged the snake-bite healer to tell them the cause of his unnatural behavior. "Tell us why," they asked. "You beat this Brahmana, and stood with your palms joined while Haridas danced. We wish to hear all about it from your own lips." Thereupon the Naga, devotee of Vishnu, began to speak as follows, through the mouth of that snake-bite healer. "What you have asked is, indeed, a great mystery and one that is not to be divulged. Yet I will assuredly tell you about the same. On beholding the spiritual trance of Thakur Haridas, all of you showed in a special manner your great devotion towards him. This Brahmana watched your conduct and through sheer malice tumbled on the ground to make a hypocritical display of devotion. But no one has power to disturb the joy of my dance by any malicious performance. Inasmuch as he falsely set himself up to caricature the devotional perturbations of Haridas, I have inflicted this severe punishment on him." The idea by which this wicked Brahmana was led to act the part of a hypocrite was that people might be thereby deceived to honor him as a great personage. His only object was self-advertisement by means of an exhibition of seemingly pious activity. Such arrogant people have no love for Krishna. One may obtain the devotional aptitude to Krishna if only one is perfectly free from all desire to deceive. You have witnessed the dance of Haridas. Those who have the good fortune of ever beholding his dance are wholly relieved from the bondage of the world. Krishna himself dances when Haridas dances. The whole world is sanctified by the sight of his dance. He is, indeed, deservedly named the servant of Hari. Krishnachandra eternally dwells in his heart. He is a lover of every entity, is the benefactor of all, appearing in the company of the Lord himself in every birth. He is free from offense against Vishnu and the Vaishnavas. His vision does not stray to the wrong path even in sleep. The soul, who finds his company for the fraction of a moment, verily gains the refuge of the lotus feet of Krishna. The highest souls such as Brahma, Shiva, etc., experience a great exaltation of heart if they chance to be favored by the company of a devotee like Haridas. He has appeared in an inferior race in order to prove the utter worthlessness of birth and lineage for the purpose of worshipping Krishna. All the scriptures declare that if the devotee of Vishnu makes his appearance in the lowest of families, he is still the only person who is fit to be honored. If one, who is born of the highest lineage, do not serve Krishna, he is doomed to perdition, his high birth being of no avail. In order to bear testimony to the truth of those declarations of the Veda, Haridas appeared in a family of the lowest social standing. Just as Prahlada is a demon, Hanuman a monkey, so is Haridas a low-born person. Only in name the celestials covet the touch of Haridas. The Ganges herself desires the immersion of Haridas in her sacred stream. It is not necessary to touch but only to have a sight of Haridas, to be relieved for good from the bondage of the eternal chain of one's fruitive activities. If I go on speaking for hundreds of years, it would not be possible for me to reach the limit of his greatness. You are most fortunate. It is for the sake of such as you that this imperfect account of his glory has manifested itself on my lips. He who takes the name of Haridas only once will assuredly attain to the realm of Krishna. The king of the Nagas lapsed into silence after delivering the above discourse. The good people were satisfied on hearing this wonderful speech. The great Naga, who is the eternal devotee of Vishnu, made known in this manner the nature of the spiritual perturbations of Haridas. All people were already well disposed towards Thakur Haridas. They were most highly delighted on learning these things about him from the mouth of the Naga. These performances of Thakur Haridas may be ordinarily supposed to belong to the class of events that are called miracles in the theology of certain creeds. But they are not supernatural occurrences in the sense of being immune from the operation of the laws of physical nature for no other reason than that they are the performances of possessors of superior power. Like his immunity from physical and mental suffering under severe castigation at the hands of the Yavanas, the conduct of Haridas towards the serpent, his dense perturbations and trances are only expressions of his great love for Krishna. They are justified and explained properly by the laws of spiritual love which transcend, and by transcending fulfill, the imperfect and essentially unwholesome laws of physical nature. The cudgeling of the hypocritical Brahmana is similarly an exhibition of love for Godhead on the part of the snake-bite healer, while the barbarous behavior of the Yavanas towards Haridas is an act of hatred against the divinity notwithstanding the scriptural language in which it was sought to be clothed by the Qazi. It is not the external appearance of an act that constitutes its spiritual worth. In the one case, an act of apparent cruelty is to be justly regarded as the exhibition of unalloyed devotion to the truth. In the other case, an externally identical act against Thakur Haridas is to be justly condemned as it proceeded from sheer malice and cruelty of disposition. So it is not the external appearance that determines the spiritual quality of an act. But it is much more difficult to prove, to the satisfaction of atheists, how love for Krishna can be the sole criterion of spiritual activity. Haridas Thakur cares only to act under the impulse of love for Krishna in all situations. It is only for this reason and for no other that his conduct is to be regarded as spiritual. The relation to Krishna is the only condition by which to distinguish spiritual from non-spiritual conduct. Spiritual conduct is beneficial to the person practicing it as well as to those who are in any way brought within its influence. Any form of conduct which is devoid of reference to Krishna is bound to be equally and altogether harmful to all parties concerned. It is this consideration which lifts the activities of the theist above the level of the so-called moral conduct, which is related to a standard of duty towards others independently of the exclusive reference to the divinity. The dens, the trends, the horripilation and other perturbations also belong to the category of spiritual activities that are supremely beneficial for all concerned because of their exclusive reference to Krishna. If a hungry man is fed by the birds at the command of another person, the latter may be credited with the possession of extraordinary power for removing physical suffering. But such conduct should not, therefore, be called also spiritual, although it may be moral in the empiric, i.e., worldly sense which that term has come to acquire quite wrongly at the hands of empiric exponents of ethical conduct unconnected with Godhead. The theistic point of view cannot logically recognize the possibility of any person being really benefited by any activity that has no direct, conscious and sole reference to Godhead. The conduct of the hypocritical Brahmana is on a par with that of the Qazi who ordered that Thakur Haridas should be beaten to death for taking the name of Hari. Hypocrisy and fanaticism are not far removed from one another as regards Genesis. The reference to Krishna may be, and, as a matter of fact, often is, intended to cover a selfish purpose. The Qazi wanted to punish Haridas for a political and racial reason. The Brahmana sought his own fame and also to spite Thakur Haridas. These motives have nothing to do with Krishna, who is the absolute truth himself, in whom there can be no scope for malice or narrowness. The apparently harsh conduct of the snakehead healer towards the hypocritical Brahmana is an act of mercy, solely because it is prompted by exclusive regard for the servant of Krishna. If Krishna himself is conceived in any narrow sense, any reference to such false concept of the corrupt brain of man will not also make one's conduct spiritual. Krishna does not owe his nature to the particular conception of the person who wants to be related to him. There is only one way in which one's relationship with Krishna may be really established, viz., by the resolve of single-hearted devotion to the truth absolute, combined necessarily with the equally single-hearted resolve to eschew all association with non-Krishna. Any act that expresses these complementary characteristics is alone entitled to be designated as spiritual conduct. Partiality for any really narrow conception, by merely calling the same Krishna, will not enable a person to escape the punishment that is due to the enjoyment of non-Krishna, any more than any other form of covert hostility to the truth. The kind and forbearing attitude of Thakur Haridas towards the offending Yavanas must not also be praised for its quality of toleration of any form or degree of untruth. Thakur Haridas did not pity the Yavanas for the reason that they were not responsible for their ignorance. Haridas knew that ignorance is really identical with aversion to Krishna, and he had, therefore, no motive to find any excuse for their hostility to truth. All that he desired to express was that his own punishment was fully deserved, and not that the unpardonable aversion to Krishna that was openly displayed by the Qazi and his Myrmidons did not deserve to be punished. He was silent on this last point. Thakur Haridas passed his days in the performance of the chant of the name till the period when Sri Gaurachandra at last began to manifest his Leela of bestowing loving devotion to Krishna on the people of this world. The world stood in extreme need of the manifestation of divine mercy in his highest perfection. In all parts of the country all the people were altogether lacking in devotion to Vishnu. No one knew that there could be such a thing at all as the Kirtana of Krishna. Not only was there no sign of any spirit of devotion to Vishnu in any part of the country, but it was the public fashion to ridicule the Vaishnavas. The attitude of hostility and contempt towards the Vaishnavas was universal, there being no exception to the rule. This state of public feeling compelled the Vaishnavas to sing the name of Sri Krishna by clap of hand only among themselves. Even this modest activity proved too much for the patience of those wicked people. The atheists hurled their invectives against the Vaishnavas whenever they met one of themselves. The grievance of those people against the Vaishnavas have been recorded by Thakur Brindavandas in many passages of his work, and we have already referred to them at several places of this narrative. Here are a few additional samples of the ordinary charges that were brought against the Vaishnavas by their implacable enemies. These Brahmanas will bring ruin upon the country. These Brahmanas resort to various devices in the shape of singing the name with excessive display of sentimentality, in order only to live by begging. The Lord sleeps during the 4 months of the rainy season. Is it meet to call upon him with a loud voice at all time? If the sleep of the Lord is broken by their noise, he will be most angry and afflict the country with famine. There can be no doubt of this. There were not a few who said, if the price of paddy is found to increase ever so little, we will make our fists familiar with the shoulders of these miscreants. Some opined that it is indeed fit to chant loudly the name of Govinda by keeping awake during the night of the 11th day of the lunar fortnight. What is the use of uttering the name every day? This was the utmost concession that the best disposed people of the society were prepared to make to the Vaishnavas, although the people in general did by no means endorse such a policy of undeserved indulgence towards them. The devotees felt sorely grieved at heart by hearing night and day all these blasphemies, but no one of them ceased to chant loudly the name of Krishna in the company of the Vaishnavas. Haridas was also filled with sorrow on beholding the absence of any regard for the communion of devotion in the people. Yet Haridas continued to chant his Lord with a loud voice and employed his mouth exclusively to this supreme function. But the loud chant of Hari even by Thakur Haridas proved unbearable to certain extremely wicked sinners. A certain wicked Brahmana, who belonged to the village of Harinadi, angrily protested against his practice. Haridas said he, "What is this that you are doing? What is the reason of your uttering the name with such a loud voice? It is enjoined by the religion that the name is to be taken mentally without being audible. What scriptures tell you of addressing Godhead by calling upon his name with a loud voice? By whose teaching is the name of Hari recited with a loud voice? Let this assembly of the Pandits judge what you have got to say to this." Haridas said, "You are all Pandits and well versed in the scriptures. You must know very well all the reasons in favor of this method. You are also well aware of the greatness of the name of Hari. In reply to your question I can only repeat what I have heard from the Pandits such as you are yourselves. If the name is uttered with a loud voice no offense is committed. On the other hand the excellence of the process is augmented 100-fold if me name is uttered with a loud voice. This is declared by the scriptures. The particular text of the scriptures I refer to is as follows: by uttering the name with a loud voice the excellence is augmented 100-fold. The Brahmana asked, what is the reason that the meritorious effect is increased 100-fold by uttering the name with a loud voice? Haridas proceeded to explain. Listen, revered sir, said he, the reason of it is given in the Veda and the Bhagavatam. All the scriptures manifested themselves on the holy lips of Thakur Haridas. He was impelled to expound by the joy of Krishna bliss. Hear, O Vipra, said Thakur Haridas, by listening to the name of Krishna only once, beasts, birds and insects find unobstructed passage to the holy realm of Vaikuntha. Here is my text. What is the wonder of the brood serpent, being delivered by the touch of the feet of Krishna, by the taking of whose name the person uttering the same is at once sanctified among with all those who listen to him? The beasts, birds, insects, etc., cannot utter the name of Hari. They are saved as soon as they chance to hear the name. If the name of Sri Krishna is taken mentally, only the person taking the holy name is saved thereby. By chanting the name with a loud voice the chanter benefits others also. It is for this reason that all the scriptures declare that the good is augmented 100-fold if the name is chanted with a loud voice. The text of the Bhagavatam is as follows. It is, indeed, fit that the chanter of the name of Hari with a loud voice is 100 times better than one who takes the name mentally. The person who takes the name mentally saves only himself. One who chants the name with a loud voice saves also his hearers. So by the authority of the Purana I hold that one who chants the name with a loud voice is 100 times superior to him who does so mentally. The reason of this, O Vipra, also deserves to be listened to most attentively. By mentally taking the name a person maintains only himself. If one chant the name of Govinda with a loud voice every creature is delivered as soon as he hears. All animals, with the sole exception of men, although they are privileged to possess a tongue, are unable to utter the sound of the name of Krishna. The process, by which even those, who are born in vain, are saved, certainly does not deserve to be condemned. There are those who maintain thousands besides themselves. Which of them is superior? This is easy to find by a tittle of reflection. It is for this reason that the superior merit of the process of chanting the name with a loud voice is held to be well established. The reply of Thakur Haridas only served to augment the anger of that wicked Brahmana who now threw off the mask of the hypocritical inquirer and began openly to revile Thakur Haridas. He said, Haridas has at last become the maker of our philosophy. So the path of the Veda is going to be destroyed before our very eyes after enduring through the ages. It is said that the Sudra is destined to expound the Veda towards the close of the Iron Age. That thing has come to pass at this very moment without our having to wait for the end of the Yuga. I can now see what it really is. You go about from door to door feeding on the choicest delicacies by this capital method of cheap self-advertisement. If the explanation thou hast offered is proved to be wide of the mark, thy nose and ear require to be chopped off on the spot. On hearing these blasphemous effusions of that wretch of a Brahmana, Thakur Haridas smiled slightly as he uttered the name of Hari. Without making any further reply, Haridas left the place, continuing to chant the name of Hari with a loud voice. Those who happened to be present in the assembly were also sinful persons and, being of an evil disposition, made no proper answer to what was said by that Brahmana. All these Brahmanas, observes Thakur Brindavandas, are verily cannibals, Rakshasas. They are Brahmanas only in name. All of them are proper objects of punishment by Yama. In the Kali Yuga all the Rakshasas are ordained to be born in the families of the Brahmanas for venting their spite against the good people. The Rakshasas, under the fostering care of Kali, are born in the womb of Brahmanas. They oppress the few who really possess the knowledge of the Vedas. The Dharma, Shastra, indeed, forbids to touch, hold talk with or bow to these brahmanas in any circumstances. What more need be said? It is incumbent to avoid addressing or touching those brahmanas who are non-Vaishnavas even by mistake. In this world it is one's duty not to see a non-Vaishnava brahmana, even as one should avoid the sight of the dog-eating Chandala. The Vaishnava, although he be born outside the Varnas, sanctifies the three worlds. If one, born a Brahmana, be not a Vaishnava, by even talking with such a person one loses the merits acquired by his previous good deeds. I have reproduced the words of Thakur Brindavandas and also the texts of the scriptures quoted by him. Thakur Brindavandas informs us that a terrible calamity overtook the offending Brahmana only a few days after the above occurrence. The nose of the Brahmana fell off by an attack of the smallpox. The punishment which he had proposed for Thakur Haridas was allotted to himself by Krsna. We next meet Thakur Haridas in Nabadwip, whither he was attracted by the prospect of the society of the Vaishnavas. He resided there as the honored guest of Sri Advaitakarya on a footing of intimate friendship with all the devotees. It is, however, necessary, before we leave this portion of our narrative, to offer a few remarks on an important aspect of the incident just described. The method of chanting in company the name of Hari with a loud voice within the hearing of all persons is the form of worship that was subsequently instituted by Sri Caitanya as the dispensation for the present controversial age. The only offense, which may stand effectively in the way of one's taking the name of Hari, is absence of faith in the transcendental nature of the name himself and of Sri Guru on whose lips the name manifests himself. Provided one is not deliberately resolved to disbelieve the divine nature of the name and the spiritual nature of his chanter, there is no other circumstance that can stand in the way of one's taking the name mentally or uttering him with a loud voice. The second of these methods is called Kirtana. This is held to be much more efficacious than the mental process. By taking the name only once, a person is relieved from the bondage of nescience for good. On the manifestation of the natural function of the soul, the abnormal function automatically disappears. The Kirtana or loud chant of the name is the only function of the soul in the state of divine grace. By his means the whole world is to be saved. This is the dispensation of this age. But this is vehemently objected to by Brahmanas of the stamp of the person who reviled Thakur Haridas at Haranadi. It is necessary to consider the mentality that produces such vehement opposition to a method which should appear even to those who may not have any faith in it as hardly capable of giving offense to anybody. No one is likely to be angry with the loud chanter of the name of Hari unless he is himself accustomed to take the name in the offensive manner. The rank atheist is less dangerous than the hypocrite. A person takes the name of Hari mentally, but opposes the loud chant of the name. What can be the reason of such opposition? It can be but due to the natural partiality for the wrong method to which he has been accustomed, as he must believe, on principle. But if he is asked further why he takes the name of Hari even mentally, the opposer of the loud chant should have no reasonable answer to give. The transcendental sound is the name of Hari. The name as sound is identical with Hari. Hari's name makes his appearance in this world as sound through the medium of the chanters of the name. The name is to be heard only from the lips of pure devotees. If he is so heard, even without faith but without offense, the dormant function of the soul is aroused thereby, enabling the hearer also to chant the name. As soon as the name appears on the tongue, Hari is fully served. But why should the name, received from his loud chanter, appearing on the tongue of the hearer, be recited mentally in order to prevent others from hearing him? The mantra, indeed, requires to be repeated to oneself mentally. The mantra is also the name, but not in the form of direct address. The mantra is the formula by which the person repeating the same makes a surrender of his mind and its function to the name who is yet inaccessible to the worshipper because of his conditional state. If the name is compared to the full-blown flower, the mantra would be comparable to the unopened bud. The mantra is the formula for getting rid of the vanity of one's mental existence. The mantra helps to clear the way for the appearance of the name. The mantra involves mental surrender to the Guru and is, therefore, a deliberate act of conviction on the part of the person who is entitled to practice this method. The mantra in fact represents the special favor of the Guru and the personal relationship between the disciple and the spiritual guide. The imparting of the mantra is tantamount to recognition by the Guru that a person is accepted as disciple. This process is called diksha, which means the bestowal of spiritual enlightenment by elimination of sinfulness, by the spiritual guide to the disciple who is disposed by sincere conviction to walk in the path of service under divine guidance manifested through the Guru. The chanting of the name of Hari, after hearing him from the lips of the pure devotee, in the company of his devotees, is the method of worship that was to be promulgated by Sri Caitanya as the only dispensation for the age. Thakur Haridas is the Akriya, or the divinely authorized practicing teacher, of this very function. He is here found to declare that the chanting of the name with a loud voice is open to all persons and does not require on the part of the neophyte any precondition of fitness except the absence of deliberate opposition to recognizing the name as being identical with the transcendental possessor of the name, i.e., Godhead himself. If there is no deliberate intention of refusing to acknowledge the divinity of the name appearing on the lips of the pure devotee of Krishna, a person is eligible to hear and, after hearing, sing the name in the company of his devotees by discarding all unnecessary association with unbelievers. By practicing the chant of the name in this manner, that is to say by being free from the offenses of intimate association with unbelievers and the intention of deliberately cherishing any doubt or disbelief regarding the divinity of the holy name manifesting himself in the form of the sound on the lips of pure devotees, a person should be enabled in due course to realize the divine nature of the name, i.e., of Krishna, his service and of his own soul as being the eternal servant of Krishna. But the mantra is not really different from the chant of the name. It only marks a stage of progress in an identical process. After the name begins to be chanted in the manner that is free from offense against the name, one begins to make progress on the path of spiritual endeavor. The first sign that actual progress is being made manifests itself in the form of the conviction that it is necessary to follow unconditionally the guidance of the Guru from whose lips the name has been heard. This is the specific entry into the properly serving state of the process. The position may also be explained in another way. The chanting of the name with a loud voice in the manner that is free from offense is not possible for a person till he is relieved of the exclusively mental outlook on life which is inevitable in the conditioned state. So long as the mental outlook retains its prevailing force, a person cannot conscientiously recognize the necessity of unconditional submission to the guidance of the Guru. This is so because he cannot realize by mental one speculation the spiritual nature of the personality of the bona fide Guru and the consequent necessity of unconditional surrender to the bona fide spiritual guide. It also does not follow that after the mantra is received one is not entitled to chant the name with a loud voice. On the contrary, it is the mantra who in his turn strengthens the faith of the chanter in the divinity of the name by relieving him from the obstructive force of mental speculation regarding the spiritual function. The mantra has to be repeated mentally because all persons are not entitled to listen to it, nor does it concern anyone else except the person to whom it is imparted. The identity between the name and the mantra is established by the fact that the mantra is also the name with the addition of the personal admission that the chanter is convinced that he can be relieved from the state of ignorance regarding the spiritual nature of the name only by following unconditionally the guidance of the Guru. It will not do to repeat the mantra mentally without receiving the same from the Guru, for the reason that the process would then be meaningless. The mantra really means that a person places himself under the unconditional guidance of the Guru in order to realize the spiritual function of chanting the name of Hari without offense. If there is no Guru whom the person is to follow, there is no meaning in merely uttering a formula which implies one's consent to practice obedience to the Guru. The Guru understands the particular state of spiritual eligibility of the conditioned soul and is also aware of Krishna's intention in regard to him. He is the channel used by Krishna to convey his mercy to the conditioned soul. The best of devotees are alone privileged to enjoy this supreme confidence of Krishna. It is the function of the Guru to raise the disciple to the level of the intimate confidence of Krishna, because Krishna is fully served only by the congregational method to be found in the perfectly spiritual community of his pure devotees. The unfortunate Brahmana of Haranadi and the learned Pandits assembled there could not understand the necessity or propriety of chanting the name of Hari with a loud voice because they were satisfied with their individual mental outlooks and speculative opinions regarding the teaching of the scriptures, although the same scriptures are never tired of warning their readers against committing the offense of confounding the spiritual with the physical or mental issue. Those learned Pandits had found the untruth which they were seeking in their lives by precept and example. No sincere seeker of the truth should, however, allow himself to be deliberately committed to views regarding the worship of Godhead for the purpose of thereby ensuring his own superiority over his fellow men. Those pseudo-Brahmanas were too fond of the social superiority of their hereditary position to be inclined to pay heed to the real meaning of the scriptures, which is so utterly incompatible with the social privileges which they so unworthily monopolized. It is seldom that the prosperous and confirmed thief is inclined to pay serious attention to the counsels of stainless honesty. Chapters XI, Pilgrimage to Gaya and Initiation. Nimai Pandit continued to teach his students in Nabadwip after his marriage with Sri Vishnupriya Devi. The Lord was leading the ideal life of the householder Brahmana up to this point of our narrative. It was the life that is enjoined by the Dharma Shastras for those who want to lead a life that is not opposed to spiritual well-being. But it is not itself the spiritual life. The life of the Brahmana is the model for the other classes of the worldly people. It places before us the necessity of not putting one's trust exclusively in the so-called good things of this world. If one has to live in this world, as one must till he finds it really necessary to change his worldly life for one that is higher, he should constantly keep before him the purpose underlying the life of the Brahmana as laid down in the scriptures. It does not mean that everyone should embrace the calling of the teacher of religion, nor that everyone should marry. So long as a person feels any affinity for the activities of this world, he should learn a calling that is to his taste and follow the same. Those who feel a taste for the work of a teacher have also to qualify themselves for the same by adopting a life that is in keeping with the proper discharge of the responsibilities of that particular worldly calling. The teacher of the people must in the first place lead a life that is in conformity with the interests of his pupils. The highest of all interests is knowledge of the Brahman. One who is devoid of the knowledge of the Brahman is debarred by this radical disqualification from taking charge of the education of the people. It is not the purpose of the scriptures to prevent the proper cultivation of any branch of knowledge by thus making the Brahmana the sole custodian of the education of the people. The arrangement recommended by the Shastras does not recognize the competence of any secular knowledge to free us from the fetters of ignorance, and is, therefore, unwilling to recognize the cultivation of such knowledge for its own sake, and is opposed to the purely secular education which they do not consider to be beneficial or even harmless pastime. All persons, even those who are engaged in secular pursuits, must possess the spiritual outlook to be enabled to function properly even in those pursuits. The superiority and desideratum of spiritual living in its unadulterated purity must be recognized by being practically imposed on all social institutions. It must, however, be borne in mind that it is not to a sacerdotal, hereditary caste that the scriptures intend to bestow the lucrative privilege of the monopoly of a trade of educating the people. Any person who possesses the genuine disposition to seek for the truth and who prefers the quest of the truth to every other consideration, to whatever class of the society he may belong by birth, is to be recognized as a Brahmana who is fit for this purely spiritual purpose for its own sake. It does not appear that the scriptures, by means of the Varnasrama organization, sought to prevent the free choice of secular occupation by individuals. As a matter of fact, the object of the institution is just the opposite of this. It requires every individual to be put into the profession that best suits his natural aptitude and to do this at the proper early age. But it also recognized a natural graduation of classes. It considers the position of the spiritual teacher of society as superior to that of all the others. Next, below the spiritual teachers, it puts the spiritually guided ruling class. Those who are the leaders of the economic pursuits under spiritual direction come next below the political body. The fourth estate consists of those who are devoid of spiritual inclination but are prepared to earn a living by loyally serving others who are spiritually disposed. The peculiarity of the arrangement is that it puts the spiritually enlightened teaching class, carefully recruited from all the classes, at the head of the society, not in the political, nor in the economic, but in the purely spiritual sense. If a Brahmana meddles in politics or trade or service, he automatically loses his status as a teacher. As a teacher, the Brahmana is to be maintained by the free gifts of the community to be obtained, not by political pressure but by begging by the teachers themselves or their students on their behalf. It is incumbent on the Brahmana not to amass any wealth but to devote all surplus wealth which may come into his hands in the way that is spiritually beneficial for the society. In other words, the Brahmana lives for the purpose of finding the truth in order to serve him when found. His life is the probationary stage of spiritual living. The practical result of this obligation, on the part of the teacher, of leading the theistic life enjoined by the scriptures, would not be objectionable as long as the process of recruitment remains inefficient. The scriptures provide that an unworthy teacher should forfeit his position as a matter of course. The function of degrading such a person belongs to the body of the Brahmanas. We find that the privilege was misunderstood and grossly abused in actual practice. But it would be difficult to suggest that the system itself is, therefore, a defective one. If any society wants to be guided by the instruction of unworthy persons, it is always free to do so and to be ruined by choosing to do so. The Varnasrama institution is a secular organization and as such shares the unavoidable defect of all such institutions. It is claimed to be the only organization that has been scientifically conceived for the promotion of spiritual living. Unless this is borne in mind, it would be difficult to understand what follows. We have seen that Sri Gaur Sundar had been leading the life of the ideal Brahmana householder up till now. The actual mode of life that he led has already been described in different ways. The successful endeavor to live the life of a Brahmana was now to be rewarded by the attainment of spiritual enlightenment, which is the goal to which it is directed. This is the secondary aspect of the event that we are now going to narrate. The Supreme Lord was induced to manifest his appearance in this world by being moved to pity by the sufferings of his devotees. The Iron Age proved too bad to be redeemed by the exertions of his agents. Even Sri Advaita, who is the cause of the appearance of the Lord, had been set at naught by the stubborn atheists of Nabadwip, despite the universal respect in which he was personally held in all the learned circles and among those Brahmanas who occupied the highest social position. In spite of the personal exertions of Advaita and all the devotees who were resident at Nabadwip, there was perceptible no change for the better in the attitude of the people towards the Vaishnavas. On the contrary, their hostility to the Vaishnavas continued to increase and at last became intolerable. The denunciation of the Vaishnavas by those bad people became the constant and fashionable pastime of the day. The devotees felt the greatest sorrow on beholding the prevalence of such universal preference for false worldly pleasures on the part of the people. The very name of devotion was banned from the category of topics worthy of their serious discussion. Vishnu and the Vaishnavas were, however, constantly reviled by one and all. All this was happening at Nabadwip under the eyes of the Lord himself, who was all the time absorbed in scholastic pursuits. The grief of his devotees at last moved the Lord to compassion and made him manifest his activity of the Savior. But before the Supreme Lord openly ranged himself on the side of his devotees, he wished to visit the holy Tirtha of Gaya. For the ostensible purpose of performing the due funeral rites in honor of his departed father, the Lord set out for Gaya with many of his disciples. With a mind full of great delight, the Lord took leave of his mother and obtained her permission for the journey to Gaya. The holy feet of the Lord then began their triumphal progress towards Gaya, sanctifying all the country and the villages wherein the people dwelt, turning them into the holiest of Tirthas. The Lord journeyed in the company of his numerous followers in the pleasure of delightful talk on all manner of topics ranging from religion to gossip and hilarious laughter and jocoseness. Traveling for days in this fashion, the Lord reached Mandara, and after beholding Sri Madhusudan, who is worshipped there, roamed over the hill to please himself. But in a few days after the resumption of his journey, the Lord manifested the Leela of falling ill by an attack of fever. The Lord was to all appearance smitten with fever, like ordinary men, on his way in the middle of the journey. This filled the hearts of his disciples with great anxiety. They halted on their way and made every effort for having him cured of the distemper. But the fever obstinately refused to be healed, such being the will of the Lord. At last the Lord prescribed the proper medicine for himself, declaring that drinking the water that had been used in washing the feet of a Brahmana relieves from all suffering. In order to vindicate the greatness of the feet wash of Brahmanas, the Supreme Lord drank the same himself in the view of all the people. As soon as he had drunk the feet wash of the Brahmanas, the Supreme Lord was instantly restored to the healthy state and the fever left for good. Thakur Brindavandas, commenting on the above, says that the Veda and the Puranas bear testimony to the fact that it is the nature of Godhead to drink the feet wash of Brahmanas, and quotes the following from the Gita: I serve everyone in the way that he submits to me. Men, O Partha, follow in all cases the lead of my service. The service of Krishna is performed by all the activities of men. All methods of activity come under the category of the service of the indivisible knowledge, who is identical with Krishna. If it be asked what constitutes the basic difference between the methods of fruitive activity seeking to merge in the undifferentiated Brahman and the path of devotion, the only possible modes of activity open to the individual soul, the answer is that the last is the model for the rest. Everyone seeks to follow his own inner conviction and light. In proportion as the light within is actually followed, it also gives the proper guidance. To one who chooses to follow the inner guidance only partially, the light offers only a proportionately partial view of himself. One who chooses to neglect him is offered a correspondingly deluding view of the truth, and one which he finds more in accordance with his choice. But the light, whom all men serve in different ways, is always the same indivisible knowledge, dealing with his votaries in the way that his votaries choose to deal by him. The difference is, therefore, due to the degree of submission to the indivisible knowledge that is actually offered by the individual soul. The doctrine of rebellion against Godhead, to explain the origin of sin, is true only in the above sense. Krishna is found and served only by those who offer their full submission to the indivisible truth. When one offers less than his full submission to Krishna, he no longer sees Krishna as he is, but in an eclipsed form of the truth corresponding to his own imperfect homage to him. Indra is also Krishna, but only as viewed by the worshipper who covets the pleasure of paradise. Every object of worship to be found in the different creeds, which is offered less than the whole service, is also Krishna in his secondary, i.e., deluding, forms. When the object of worship is not Krishna, or is an eclipsed view of Krishna, the indivisible knowledge does not show himself to the worshipper, who experiences in consequence all those difficulties that beset the path of those who do not worship Krishna as he is. Sri Gaur Sundar exhibited the pastime of drinking the feet wash of Brahmanas and not of non-Brahmanas, to signify that Krishna fulfills all requirements of the soul who throws himself wholly on his protection, but he does not deal in the same way with those who are not disposed to serve him. He is not disposed to accept the service of those who are not disposed to offer him their wholehearted service, but he keeps back nothing from his devotee. Nay, he uses all his power in vindicating the preeminence of his devotees over those who are not disposed to serve him fully. Thakur Brindavandas goes so far as to assert that the Lord serves those who seek to serve him in every way by their whole attitude and at all time. The Lord is the servant of his servant. He is subdued by his servant. This is in keeping with what has been stated above. In the battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna was compelled by Bhishma to take up arms, thereby breaking his own promise to observe absolute neutrality during the conflict, which had led Duryodhana to prefer to accept the help of Krishna's army to Krishna's own person, pledged not to fight by actually using his weapons against any party. Bhishma did not consider this policy of Duryodhana, on whose side he had to fight against his own better judgment, to be at all wise. And he told Duryodhana that Krishna was bound to break his promise if he found the Pandavas in real danger. Bhishma was confident of proving his contention, as he knew that without the active help of Krishna no one could prevail against anyone. Krishna could, of course, have easily made the Pandavas prevail over Bhishma without openly breaking his promise or neutrality. But he preferred to be vanquished on this point in order to glorify both Bhishma and Arjuna, who were his devotees. Krishna is thus proved to be always ready to obey the wish of his devotee even when it seems to run counter to his own. There are numerous instances of this kind of conduct on the part of Godhead in the Puranas, when he allows himself to be vanquished by his devotee whenever he is seriously opposed by the latter. I am perfectly aware that there are persons who have grossly misinterpreted the shloka of the Gita, quoted above by Thakur Brindavandas, and also the conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar on this occasion. There is a body of opinion among a section of the commentators of the scriptures who are inclined to exploit the passages in the scriptures expressing the superiority of the Brahmanas into an argument in favor of the unconditional predominance of the hereditary caste of Brahmanas over everything, including the divinity himself. Sri Gaur Sundar as well as Sri Krishna are held by these commentators to be upholders of the social and spiritual superiority of the hereditary Brahmana caste. The point is pushed to the promulgation of the view that those worshippers of Krishna, who are not born in the Brahmana caste, are rendered inferior to the caste Brahmanas by their not being born in Brahmana families. This ridiculous interpretation of the particular passages of the scriptures, of which an instance is given above, is so obviously sectarian and so utterly opposed to the contexts in which they appear that there should remain at this point of the narrative no ground for such silly misunderstanding on the part of those readers who are not pledged to shut their eyes to the truth out of deference to narrow individual or class prejudices. The true Brahmana is certainly deserving of universal respect by reason of his disposition for the unconditional service of the truth. But no one is a Brahmana who does not serve the truth in this unreserved manner. The truth is identical with Vishnu. A Brahmana who does not serve Vishnu is worse than a Chandala whose very sight is to be avoided by all persons. Therefore, it is not the birth that makes the Brahmana in the sense in which he is to be regarded as the servant of Vishnu. It is the test of complete submission to Vishnu that is the only consideration. The distinction between one person and another is due to the measure in which he is disposed to serve not a fancy of his erring mind under the name of truth but the truth himself, who is no other than Vishnu. If one does not serve Vishnu, i.e., Godhead as he really is, he cannot claim the homage of society by reason of his birth in a Brahmana family. The community of genuine Brahmanas would also necessarily repudiate all claims of their own social superiority independently of the reference to the service of Vishnu, which is the one thing needful and is admitted as such in practice by the Brahmanas who follow this real interpretation of the scriptures and who are recruited from among all classes of the people by this sole text. The doctrine that requires unconditional submission to the feet of Godhead does not entail any curtailment of our individual liberty to serve the truth in the way we choose. There is no loss of scope or diversity on the plane of complete submission, but only an increase in the degree and outlook of the faculty of cognition. The very same act is viewed differently from different angles of vision even on the plane of the absolute, but without causing any loss of harmony. On the mundane plane there are also the same different angles of vision, but they conflict with one another and produce only a temporary and unwholesome result by their diversity. The game is not worth the candle in the latter case. A person who is located on the mundane plane commits the fatal error of looking at everything from a point of view that is not really his own. This real abandonment of his individuality is wrongly supposed, by mere force of habit, as constituting his proper individual point of view. In this case there is not only a disadvantageous angle of vision from which the truth cannot be properly seen, but also a resolve not to see the truth. Truth can be seen only by the serving disposition. If I choose to look at the truth from the point of view of the master, I am left by the process without any ground to stand upon. This is so because the truth does not serve anyone except himself. If I choose to look at truth from the point of view of the master and choose to call this as my individual angle of vision for viewing the truth, I thereby commit the offense of suppressio varianasmic, as my real intention, in taking up the impossible point of view, is not to see the truth at all but only a particular hypothetical entity or non-truth that is made to appear to my view by my own manipulation to miss the sight of the truth. The protection of Godhead in all circumstances is realizable as the basic condition of all rational activity on the part of the individual soul. The devotee is, therefore, under no temptation of seeking to disown the refuge of the lotus feet of Krsna, even if such ambition be permitted a seeming scope by the absolute master himself. The devotee is spontaneously and exclusively attached to the feet of Krsna not by the need of the preservation of his rational consistency of conduct but by the innate impulse of love. The devotee seeks the protection of the Lord for the satisfaction of the causeless loving hankering of his pure nature for the service of the all-beautiful who is also all knowledge and all existence. There is therefore no plea which need be availed by him for seeking to disown the protection of the Lord. After displaying the pastime of getting cured of the manifestation of fever, the Lord made his way to the holy Tirtha of Punapna. Having bathed and worshipped the Pitras, Manes, the son of Sri Sachi entered Gaya. The Lord, joining his beautiful hands, made obeisance to holy Gaya on entering the sacred Tirtha, being overcome with spiritual fervor. He then proceeded to Brahmakunda and, after bathing in its holy water, duly honored the Pitras. Thence he came to Chakrabara and made haste to have the sight of the lotus feet of Sri Gadadhara. The Lord found that the holy site of the lotus feet was surrounded by the Brahmanas. The garlands, offered to the lotus feet, had accumulated to the height of a temple. The offering made of perfume, flower, incense, lighted lamp, clothing, ornament was beyond all calculation. The Brahmanas, wearing the beauty of celestials and attending on all sides, were engaged in reciting the power of the lotus feet. Ye most fortunate people, behold those feet that are clasped to his bosom by the Lord of Kashi, that are ever the life of Lakshmi, that make themselves manifest on the head of Bali. Behold all ye those feet by whose momentary meditation one ceases to be subject to the god of death, Yama. Behold, all ye fortunate people, the self-same feet that are so rarely attainable to the highest yogas, those feet in whom the sanctifying Bhagirathi makes her appearance, whom the devotee never parts from his heart. Fortunate people, behold those dearly beloved feet that repose on the couch of Sri Ananta. On hearing of the power of those feet from the lips of the Brahmanas, the Lord was overwhelmed by transcendental bliss. His two lotus eyes overflowed with tears. At the sight of the divine feet his person was decked with horripilation and shivering. So did Lord Gaurachandra, for the good fortune of all the worlds, begin the manifestation of loving devotion. The never-ceasing Ganges flowed in the eyes of the Lord. All the Brahmanas beheld the wonderful sight. I have tried to preserve the actual words of Thakur Brindavandas in describing the incident that first excited the manifestation of loving devotion by Sri Gaurasundar. This is the turning point in the career of the Lord. From this point onwards the Lord appears as the ideal devotee of Godhead. The change to spiritual life, when it does come to the Brahmana householder, comes in the form of the undeserved causeless mercy of Godhead. The mercy of Godhead is indescribable to one who has not been the recipient of the same. Had it been describable in terms of worldly experience, it would have been more or less deserved. Those who seek to understand the spiritual life in terms of mundane values contradict themselves when they assert with the same breath that Godhead is the judge of right and wrong and is the dispenser of reward for righteous conduct. If the spiritual enlightenment is a gift for righteous living preceding the gift, can it also be described as causeless or undeserved? Those who insist that the value of the spiritual life should be intelligible to a person before he accepts it, in order that he may make his choice in the rational way, only commit the mistake of begging the question. If, on the other hand, the value of the spiritual life be admitted on trust without any previous knowledge of its nature, it would be liable to be justly condemned as blind faith that has proved the fruitful source of all the patent corruptions to be found in all parts of the world, and which are cherished by their victims under the terrible self-delusion that they only appear to be bad by reason of their very transcendental nature. The sight of Vishnu's feet at Gaya gave Sri Gaurasundar his first spiritual experience as devotee. The sight of the feet of the Lord is not available to anyone except by the mercy of the Lord. Why the Lord is merciful to a person can never be known. The Supreme Lord is full of mercy and makes no distinction in bestowing his favor in boundless measure on all persons. But there is also a process of receiving his favor which depends on the free choice of the recipient of the divine favor. As soon as this condition is fulfilled by the recipient, he is rewarded with the sight of the feet of the Lord. If it be contended that a gift which is conditional on the recipient fulfilling any requirement cannot be described as either causeless or undeserved, the answer would be that the particular gift fulfills all these contradictory conditions. The gift remains causeless although it is bestowed only on those who fulfill the conditions necessary for qualifying for receiving it. The sole condition is the desire, which is also causeless, of serving the truth when found. This attitude may be called blind faith so long as the truth is yet unfound. But the truth reveals himself only to his sincere seeker. There is no cause why he should do so. But, as a matter of fact, he does so. It is the nature of truth to do so. If hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water, we are satisfied that we understand how water is formed. If it be asked why the two gases should be transformed into water at all, which is altogether a different substance, we are only offered further information on the process itself by way of explanation. We are also not dissatisfied when we get such explanation. This is so because we understand that it is our business not to question the truth of the operations of nature, because they are of the nature of facts which exist independently of our speculations regarding them. We are naturally enough only anxious to know more about the actual process of the working of the different forces of nature. The question of why this should be so, i.e., the ethical issue, does not arise at all in regard to these blind operations of nature. But when we are asked to accept the spiritual fact that the sight of the feet of Hari is capable of producing the disposition for serving the Lord, we are at once impelled to bring up the ethical question why this should be so. In regard to such attitude, however, it is important to bear in mind that the ethical question itself is always relative to a standard. That standard is the unknown quantity. The empiricists have been trying in vain to discover the real standard of the ethical instinct. All speculative standards, as yet discovered in terms of mundane values, have proved more or less unsatisfactory and wide of the mark. The only useful purpose that those speculations have served is to expose the utter futility of finding the ethical standard by the method of such speculation. The fun is that this admitted failure notwithstanding, the exponents of the so-called science of ethics do not hesitate to lay down detailed instructions for the guidance of those who are desirous of leading the ethical life. The disciples of this imperfect science are also in their turn never tired of bragging their superiority over those who are not acquainted with the conclusions, not errors, of their favorite science of moral conduct. A certain type of admirers of Christianity are especially fond of trying to prove this kind of moral superiority of the Christian religion over other creeds of the world. But if they are held tightly to the meaning of their words, they can escape only under the cover of transparent prevarications and by dint of the dense understanding or contemptuous indifference of their opponents. It is not our purpose to deny the value of the ethical instinct, but we are sworn foes of the hollow pretensions of the so-called empiric science of ethics, which has such disastrous effect on the morals of some of its votaries. It makes them insupportably self-conceited without rhyme or reason. Godhead is no doubt the source of all righteousness, but certainly not of the brand that is manufactured by the science of empiric ethics. That science will be found on examination to be opposed to the real ethical issue by its presumption of being able to explain all ethical value by the superficial analysis of the external activities in which the ethical principle seeks to express itself. The method is that of shunting off the real issue to the sidetrack and getting up a case in favor of its unworthy proxy on the evidence of non-essential adventitious circumstances. We appeal to the experience of all that no person had ever been helped to become more ethical by the mere study of the empiric ethical science, nor has any person been ever really satisfied that the science has been able to throw any light on the nature of the principle that really matters. It has, on the contrary, only offered destructive criticism of the only really ethical conduct on the irrelevant ground of the defective circumstances under which it manifests itself in this world. It's really the immaculate soul who expresses his dissatisfaction of meaningless and natural sensuous existence in the form of the ethical protest. The soul cannot be satisfied by any values offered by our mundane experience or hopes of mundane improvement. He believes instinctively in an existence which is wholly free from all these defects and is impelled by his innate nature to seek to realize the conditions of such existence. It is the question of function and plane, about which the empiricist is so unduly skeptical. The function of the soul on the mundane plane is bound unaccountably to be directed, towards only mundane objects. The mundane objective is also, in its turn, the cause of the degeneration of the function. The organs, through which the soul functions towards the mundane objective, share in the defect of the objective and are as unavoidable causes of degeneracy as the objective itself. This is the only ethical problem. The ethical instinct is thus correlated with the quest for the truth, not the speculative truth which sets its heart on a radically glorified sensuous existence, but the absolute truth to whom the present muddy understanding, with its natural preference for the dirt, has no access, and which is not even privileged to suspect that it is itself so far away from the direction of the truth. This introduces the all-important factor of the plane. The ethical life is capable of being substantively realized, in a form that is perfectly unintelligible to our present understanding, only on the plane of the absolute, to which our present faculties have no access. This brings us to the necessity of divine grace for being relieved of our mundane equipments. Until this point of view has been reached by the discontented soul by the force of his earthly disillusionments, he is not in a position to lend his ear to the message regarding the proper nature of the spiritual function and the only method of its attainment. A person who has arrived at this stage should be in a position to recognize the manifestation of divine mercy in aid of the seeker of the truth. The Archa is such divine manifestation. The feet of the Lord, worshipped at Gaia, are really the feet of the Lord himself, and may be seen as such only by the most fortunate people who have been convinced of the utter worthlessness of the promised improvement of this temporary worldly existence by speculative methods, and have been thereby led to put their trust, not blindly but in all true rational humility, in divine aid appearing in a form that is also accessible to our present defective equipments. To such a person the Archa of the feet of the Lord at Gaia manifests his divine nature. The actual service of Godhead is barred to empiricists by reason of their stubborn disbelief in the divinity of the Archa. An aspect of the Protestant movement in Christianity and the religion of Mohammed, as expounded by certain schools of his followers, inculcate doctrines akin to those of the school of the worshippers of the undifferentiated Brahman in this country. The element of error in such attitude consists in the fact that it seems to imply the wrong assumption that it is possible to rise to the conception of the nature of Godhead in a way that is also explicable to mundane judgment. The descent of Godhead is not, therefore, fully admitted. Once the empiric ambition of our capacity to work up to Godhead is properly discarded, the deluded form of iconoclastic fury should appear to be itself subject to the delusion which it claims to condemn with such otherwise laudable vehemence. The iconoclasm of the rabid iconoclast must be carefully avoided by the cultivation of the true patience of judgment if one is to earn the privilege of recognizing the descent of Godhead in the Archa. Those who are unfit to worship the Archa are still less qualified for the higher form of confidential worship of the holy name by the methods of Kirtana and recollection. The mercy of Godhead is recognizable by his influence on the disposition of his recipient. As soon as Godhead wills to show himself to the fettered soul, he does so by directing the latter to seek the guidance of his devotee. This involves two things. The person favored by Godhead is enabled to recognize the devotee and is also enabled to be convinced of the necessity of submitting to his unconditional guidance. If this result is not produced, we should suppose that the person has not really received the divine favor but has only been deceived by his own disloyal imagination. As Sri Gaur Sundar was in the act of exhibiting those spiritual perturbations that were produced by hearing the praise of the holy feet of Sri Gadadhara from the lips of the Brahmanas, Sri Iswarapuri appeared on the spot, apparently by mere accident, but really by the will of Godhead. On catching sight of Sri Iswarapuri, Sri Gaur Sundar made obeisance to him with an exhibition of his most cordial regard. Iswarapuri also on his part, on seeing Gaurachandra, embraced him with great delight. The holy forms of both were drenched with the tears of both by the force of the experience of spiritual joy. The Lord said, "My pilgrimage to Gaya has borne fruit only now inasmuch as I have obtained the sight of your feet. By offering the Pinda at Gaya only the Pitris are saved from their sufferings. Even so it is only the particular person to whom the Pinda is offered that is saved thereby. By the sight of you crores of the groups of the Pitris are instantly set free from all their fetters. Therefore, the Tirtha itself is not the equal of you. You are the highest of Tirthas and the best of all blessings. Vouchsafe to deliver me from the ocean of this worldly sojourn. I surrender my person to you, now and here. May you be pleased to make me drink of the nectarine juice of the lotus feet of Krishna. This is the gift that I pray for." Iswarapuri replied, "Listen, Pundit, I now know as certain that thou art divine portion of the Iswara himself. Our scholarship and goodness, that are thine, possible in one who is not the portion of the divinity. I have had an auspicious dream of this truth this very day. I have now obtained the fruit of it in this tangible form. I tell thee truly, Pundit, at the sight of thee I experience the transcendental bliss at all time. Ever since I beheld thee at Nadia nothing else has had any attraction for my heart. This is the bare truth I am telling thee. There is nothing else in it but the truth. I obtain the bliss of beholding Krishna by seeing thee." On hearing the true words of his beloved Iswarapuri, the Lord said laughingly, "I am, indeed, most fortunate." This was followed by a good deal of mutual talk in which both joined with alacrity. Thakur Brindavandas does not attempt to record the same, remarking that the task will be performed in future by Sri Vedavyasa. Having greeted Sri Iswarapuri in this manner, the Lord, after begging and obtaining his permission, applied himself to the performance of the funeral rites that are enjoined by the scriptures on the pious pilgrim on his arrival at the Tirtha. The Lord now performed the rite of offering the Pinda on the sand and went to the hilltop of Pritagaya. Having performed the rite of loyal homage, Shraddha, at Pritagaya, the son of Sri Sachi gratified the Brahmanas by gifts and sweet words. Having thus delivered and pleased the Pitris, the Lord proceeded to Dakshina Manasa with a glad heart. The Lord next visited Sri Ramagaya where he had performed the Shraddha when he appeared in this world as Sri Ramachandra. After performing the same ceremony at the place in this avatar also, Sri Gaurhari went from there to Yudhishthira Gaya where Yudhishthira had offered the Pinda in old times. Lord Gaurhari now exhibited the Leela of performing the same ceremony at this place in loving remembrance of that event. The Brahmanas, attending on all sides of the Lord, made him perform the Shraddha and made the Lord repeat their words. As the Lord threw the Pinda into the water on the conclusion of the ceremony, the priestly Brahmanas of Gaya caught up and swallowed the same. The Lord laughed as he saw this performance. All the worldly fetters of those Brahmanas were cancelled. After offering the Pinda at Uttara Manasa, Gauranga Srihari performed the rites of Bhima Gaya. The Lord duly performed all the customary ceremonies at Siva Gaya, Brahma Gaya and all the other places and at last went up to Shorasha Gaya. Having performed the Shorashi at Shorasha Gaya, the Lord offered the Pinda to all, with all due regard. Then, after bathing in the Brahmakunda, the Supreme Lord came up to the head of Gaya and offered the Pinda there. Taking up the excellent garlands and sandal paste with his own beautiful hands, the Lord worshipped the print of the feet of Vishnu with great joy. Having thus performed the Shraddha at all the different places, the Lord returned to his lodgings after satisfying the Brahmanas with gifts. After refreshing himself by a short rest, the Lord began to cook his meal. Just as he had finished cooking, the great Sri Iswarapuri arrived there. In the act of reciting the name of Krishna by the process of loving devotion, Puri came with tottering steps to where the Lord was preparing his meal. The Lord desisted from cooking as soon as he caught sight of Puri and, with the greatest reverence, after making his obeisance, offered him the best seat and made him seated. Puri said laughingly, "Listen, Pundit, I find that it is in very good time indeed that I chance to arrive." The Lord replied, "As the good fortune has manifested itself, may your reverence accept the alms of this cooked food today." As this request was pressed by the Lord, Puri laughed as he said, "What wilt thou have?" The Lord replied, "I will cook again, just now." Puri demurred, "What is the use of cooking again? Divide the cooked food into 2 halves. The Lord could not help smiling as he said, "If, indeed, you want to have me at all, accept all the food that has been cooked. I will cook afresh in a very short time. Be pleased not to hesitate, but do accept this alms." Thereupon the Lord, making over his own food to Puri, applied to cook for himself once again with a joyful heart. Great, indeed, is the mercy of the Lord to Sri Iswarapuri. Puri also on his part had no other inclination save towards Krishna. The Lord served the meal with his own beautiful hands. Puri ate in the state of transcendent bliss. At that very moment Ramadevi herself, unobserved by anyone, with the greatest secrecy, cooked the food for the Lord in no time. After having made Puri accept the alms of food, the Lord ate his meal with a glad heart. Those, concludes Thakur Brindavandas, who listen to this narrative of the dining of the Lord in the company of Iswarapuri, gain the treasure of the love of Krishna. After finishing his meal, the Lord, with his own holy hands, applied excellent perfumes to all parts of the person of Sri Iswarapuri. The tenderness of the love of the Lord for Iswarapuri passes the power of description of all persons. Lord Sri Caitanya, who is Godhead himself, undertook pilgrimage to the birthplace of Sri Iswarapuri. Arrived at the place, the Lord greeted it with his fervent affection. "I make my obeisance," said he, "to Sri Kumarahata, the blessed village in which Sri Iswarapuri made his appearance in this world." Caitanya wept long at the sight of the place, and could not articulate any other sound except Iswarapuri. The Lord took the earth from the spot and, tying it in his own outer cloth, brought it with him. "This is the birthplace of Iswarapuri," said the Lord. "This earth is my heart's love, my treasure, my life." With such intensity does the Lord love Sri Iswarapuri. The Supreme Lord, indeed, wields all his power to glorify his devotee. The Lord said, "That I came to Gaya on pilgrimage, has been proved to be true, as I have obtained the sight of Iswarapuri." On the following day the Lord went to Sri Iswarapuri alone by himself and implored from him, with sweet words, the favor of initiation, Diksha, by the mantra. Puri said, "It is a small matter to bestow the mantra. I can by all means give thee my life." Thereupon, Narayana, teacher guru of the world, accepted the 10-lettered mantra from him. Then the Lord, after circumambulating Puri, said to him, "I surrender my person to you. May you bend your auspicious glance on me that I may float in the ocean of the love of Krishna." On hearing these words of the Lord, Sri Iswarapuri bestowed his embrace on Sri Gaurasundar by clasping him to his bosom. The forms of both were drenched with the tears of both by love, and neither could remain unmoved. The question of unconditional submission to the spiritual guide has a close connection with that of ritual in general. Those who are on principle averse to ritualistic observance in any form are also necessarily disinclined to express in any formal way their decision to submit to the direction of the spiritual guide. They are disposed to make a distinction between the external act and the internal motive prompting the same and to hold the former as superfluous and unnecessary. This will appear to be an untenable attitude inasmuch as just to the extent that one's own differing judgment is asserted in the method and motive of offering one's submission, the submission that is so offered is rendered conditional and imperfect. Such protest is, therefore, really made against the principle of unconditional submission itself. The point that has to be borne in mind is that the submission in this case is offered to the Supreme Lord himself. If the Guru is supposed to be less than divine, less than the truth himself, the disposition that holds back the offer of unconditional submission from such an entity is both rational and perfectly justifiable. No one is under any obligation to offer his submission to the non-truth. From this point of view, the offer of partial submission to anything or to any person can be only a hypocritical show of submission against one's own conviction. The truth is truth. Adulterated truth is contradiction in terms. Adulterated truth is untruth that tries to pass itself off as truth on this mundane plane of self-deceived delusions. In this world no one is anxious to serve, but everyone is anxious to be served. Service is, therefore, rendered in the expectation of a return in service greater than what is offered, by the estimation of the recipient of service. He who renders service is actuated by this deliberate desire to deceive the recipient of such service. This is the principle of hypocrisy. Expectation of greater service from others is the antithesis of the bona fide impulse of service. One who really offers service does so without expectation of return in any form in exchange of the service that is offered. If the servant is critical, he is critical only to be on his guard against any reservation on his part. He is only anxious to render the complete service. He is anxious to be satisfied that there is no lurking reservation in this matter in any obscure corner of his heart. He is anxious to study the nature of the demand that is made upon him by his master. He is not disposed to criticize the motive or method of the master making the demand. The servant must not suppose himself to be a better judge of the requirement of his master than the master himself. If he thinks he should be allowed to judge as to how the master should be served, he steps into the place of the master and makes his real master serve the pleasure of his hypocritical servant. This would be the reversion of the natural process. The show of opposition that is made by the really loyal servant to the master's wishes should not be confounded with the desire of the disloyal servant to thwart the master for reasons of his own convenience. The demarcating line is, no doubt, an extremely fine one and is likely to be missed by those who have not a very clean heart. But there is all the difference between the seeming opposition of the loyal servant and the disloyal attempts of the mercenary self-seeker that distinguishes the genuine gold from the treacherous counterfeit. The latter of course tries to mask his disloyal motive under the profession of an overstrained solicitude for the master's interest. This only makes his conduct more hideous and ungrateful. The objectionable principle underlying the latter form of conduct is called hypocrisy. The loyal servant is free from all taint of hypocrisy. He may commit mistakes in judging the master's wishes, but he is always and fully anxious to understand and serve the wishes of his master. Any seeming opposition of his to his master's wishes, even when his judgment is wrong, also expresses his single-hearted devotion to his master's interests. The mischief is that the conditioned soul has got also other interests besides the service of the truth. The conditioned soul is prepared, in every case, to offer this mixed form of service to Godhead. The disloyal servant also is prepared to serve his master to a varying extent. It is seldom that the disloyal servant is prepared to openly defy his master in every act. But even when the disloyal servant happens to agree to serve his master, he does so for the ultimate purpose of serving only himself thereby. The hypocrite throws off the mask as soon as he is safe to disobey his master without the risk of jeopardizing his interests, or when his own interests are best promoted by open disobedience. In the case of the loyal servant, the master's difficulties only serve to vindicate the genuineness of his loyal disposition by making him still more submissive to his master. It is necessary for everyone who is really anxious to find and serve the truth to realize that the truth is not to be found by the present physical and mental equipments. It is further necessary to realize that it is nevertheless possible to find and serve the truth by the present defective equipments by the grace of truth himself. One is then prepared to wait patiently till the initiative of the truth is properly. The person who is in this genuine expectant mood is on the lookout for the appearance of the truth in any form that truth likes. He is prepared to understand that, as truth is all-powerful, he is likely to appear to his own defective understanding in a form that is least likely to conform to his natural misjudgment. He knows that all these difficulties notwithstanding, the grace of truth is sufficiently powerful to prevail over all obstacles and to manifest himself to his servant in a manner that is perfectly inconceivable to our defective judgment. This is the theistic disposition proper. It is credulous in the sense that, although it is never prepared to remain satisfied with seeming truth or half-truth, it is always fully ready to make its unconditional, that is to say, loving submission to the real truth the moment he makes his appearance. The theistic disposition is prepared to wait patiently, even inactively, as far as this is at all practicable, till the actual appearance of the master of his heart. He does not believe in pragmatic loyalty. He abhors to serve anything but the absolute truth. To such a disposition the truth is bound to manifest himself. The worship of the feet of Sri Gadadhara or the offering of the pinda to the mains by Sri Gaurasundar is not performed for any other purpose than for serving the pleasure of the Lord. An analysis of the forms of the rituals enjoined by the scriptures should make it abundantly clear to every impartial person that making the service of the Lord the only duty of all persons is their only object. There is, therefore, no falling away from theism by such activity even on the part of those who are not in a position to explain their motive to the satisfaction of those logicians who are illogically opposed to the theistic disposition. It is the atheistic attitude that makes the ritualistic worship a form of idolatry. But the atheistic iconoclast is the worst of idolaters, as he is actuated by the resolve not to recognize the omnipotence of the Supreme Lord and the consequent necessity of his grace for being enabled to distinguish between the idol and the divinity. The iconoclast launches his fury against the Lord, whom he mistakes to be stone or earth by the deluding evidence of his senses, whose slave he is by his nature. The truly serving disposition is always really humbler than the blade of grass, being aware that nothing is impossible with the Lord and that it is never possible to find him by venting one's malice against his creatures or by the assertion of one's superior claim to self-conceited righteousness. The conditioned soul stands in absolute need of grace. This grace can only descend to him when he is in the attitude of absolute humility. This grace is bestowed directly by the Supreme Lord on the sincere seeker of his grace. In the recipient, the grace of Godhead expresses his presence in the form of the rational inclination of seeking perpetual enlightenment from the devotee of Godhead. He, who is disposed to serve the Lord but not his devotee, is really disposed to serve nobody except the deluded self. One who is disposed to serve the Lord is disposed to serve his servant, if possible, with even greater loyalty. The loyal subject of the king is not, therefore, less loyal to one who is commissioned by the king to carry out his commands in regard to himself. The Guru is no other than the servant of the Lord, commissioned to effect the deliverance of those who are really anxious to serve the Lord. The Archa is the Lord making himself accessible to the worship of conditioned souls by means of all their defective equipments. The Archa is not an image made by the hand of man. Neither is the Guru immortal like ourselves. It is only the delivered soul who can help the conditioned soul to gain his deliverance. It is the eternally pure souls, who are themselves infallible by their nature, who are sent into this world in the form of the Guru to impart spiritual enlightenment to the individual soul liable to be fettered by the flesh. The Guru seems to the senses and the sensuous judgment to be an ordinary mortal, but he is not really any part of this plane at all, no more than the Archa. Both are equally manifestations of the eternal saving potency of the all-merciful Supreme Lord to deliver the conditioned soul from his self-elected bondage of the deluding energy. By an empiric analysis of the wording of the mantra or the composition of the archa or the eternal conduct of the spiritual guide, one cannot hope to gain any idea of the substantive plane of the Absolute, because it happens to be really the attitude of refusal to recognize the imperative and moral necessity of loyally seeking for the divine grace for the attainment of spiritual enlightenment. Chapters XI. His initiation Kant. Ritual may be defined as worship by means of the objects of this world, which function alone is available to the conditioned soul, rendered possible by the grace of Godhead as revealed by the scriptures and the spiritual guide to the community of the servants of the Lord. The empiric theory, which seeks to derive the form and significance of ritual from the worldly activities of the ancient peoples, is based on the assumption of the impossibility and superfluity of revelation as the source of worship. But as a matter of fact, it is never possible for men, by progress in material civilization, to attain either to the form or significance of spiritual worship. The form of worship can derive its spiritual value, if it has any, only from revelation. As it does not possess any mundane significance, it is, therefore, independent of all mundane reference. It may satisfy the spirit of antiquarian curiosity to discover how the superficial aspect of the eternal process of worship varies from country to country and from age to age. But will any number of such discoveries add to our knowledge of the real meaning of either the form or the spirit of true worship? If the mind can be supposed to be fit to worship Godhead by means of concepts or precepts referring to objects of phenomenal nature, why should such worship be impossible by means of the objects themselves? But mental worship in itself is no nearer to Godhead than the show of worship by means of material substances, both being made of non-spiritual stuff. The one is as much in need of the divine sanction as the other, if it is to reach the divinity at all. The one is as much capable of being turned into worship as the other by virtue of such sanction. The controversy among empiricists on the subject of worship rages round the external form versus the mental conception, both of which are, by themselves, i.e., as they appear to the empiricists, wholly devoid of all spiritual significance. The allied question, bearing on the same issue, may be put thus. Granted that a mental and physical activity is endowed with spiritual quality of the service of the divinity by the divine sanction, why should divine sanction itself be confined to any particular and strictly circumscribed form of such activity and not extend to the whole range of secular activities? There is apparently much to be said in favor of such contention from the point of view of ordinary rational judgment. If the whole range of activities, both physical and mental, be made to be covered by the term ritual, then the departmental narrowness that has come to attach itself to the term would be removed. There are also numerous passages in the scriptures themselves in support of such contention and to prove that one who worships Godhead necessarily does so by every act of his life. But notwithstanding all this, spiritual worship is neither narrow and departmental nor liberal and comprehensive in the empiric sense. These terms of condemnation and praise do not apply to the issue at all. It is, therefore, necessary to be humble on the threshold of any serious inquiry into the nature of the substantive spiritual function. Pantheistic thought is only one form of atheism. No mental speculation in itself is logically admissible regarding the absolute, by reason of the fact that the mind has no access to the transcendental plane. The form of the ritual is not improved by the suppression of the methods of antiquity by more modern methods on the ground that these would be more intelligible to our present judgment. The question of intelligibility in the empiric sense does not matter. When Godhead is addressed by the empiricist as the source of all existence, such form of prayer is adopted for the reason that it is supposed to be intelligible to our limited understanding. But does the prayer become a spiritual function by any such rational approval on the part of the worshipper? It is not denied that Godhead is the source of all existence. Neither is it admitted that if a person addresses Godhead as the source of all existence, he will be enabled to be in communion with Godhead by such prayer. How does he really know that Godhead is the source of everything? His real ignorance cannot be removed by merely repeating a formula whose meaning it is beyond his capacity to understand. If he chooses to remain satisfied with an empty performance, he should be considered to be indifferent to the issue. If Godhead is the source of all existence, as the rational faculty claims to know instinctively, how is the same aspiring faculty to reconcile such a supposition with its own actual utter ignorance of the nature of its relationship with its own supposed source? Hydrogen and oxygen were not instinctively claimed to be known as the source of water by the same all-knowing instinct. Is it not, therefore, only a silly and superficial vanity that leads such ignorant persons to believe that Godhead is the source of all existence? Such an attitude of ignorant omniscience, so lightly assumed as their birthright in the name of the rational instinct by deluded souls, has to be got rid of if religion is to avoid the defect that is attributed by physical scientists to the speculative philosophers, viz., that their subject bakes no bread. The sterile philosophy of empiricism has been weighed in the balance for too long a period and has been found wholly wanting. The world is in some need of a positive and real, and not merely hypothetical, solution of its spiritual difficulties. In the process of spiritual enlightenment there is also, quite inconceivably to our present power of understanding no doubt, a beginning of the process followed by a probationary stage which has to be gone through before the goal is reached. The first faint glimmering of the approaching light is sufficient to impart the consciousness of the categorical nature of the difference that separates the plane of the mind and physical body from that of the soul. All empiric questionings are at once and necessarily solved by this first experience of the actual spiritual life. Thereafter arises a new curiosity which relates itself wholly to the transcendental plane. The experience of the glimmer of light proceeding from a realm that is yet completely out of sight except by the relationship of the light which while bearing testimony to the reality of spiritual existence securely keeps the secret of all definite knowledge regarding the same, makes one anxious, not for the nostrums concocted for their idle amusement by the children of darkness but for positive information from those who really know about that world, which is only then actually realized to be perfectly unknown and unknowable to the aspiring understanding of man. The present narrative may be regarded in two possible ways. The first is the ordinary empiric way for the satisfaction of a limited curiosity born of the mental outlook. Such study is not likely to be of much positive benefit, but it may have the negative value of removing misconceptions to which even the open-minded persons are liable by reason of habitual and normal association with worldly-minded people. This narrative may strike the imagination of such a person and may induce a few to agree with the point of view of the scriptures as set forth in these pages. If any person thereupon choose to undertake to act up to the principles inculcated by the deeds of Sri Krishna Caitanya, he will be in a position to realize the necessity of praying for the grace of Godhead for directing him to the proper teacher of the truth. If the prayer is, indeed, not altogether hypocritical, the sincere seeker of divine aid may be rewarded by the mercy of Godhead and find the bona fide spiritual guide. The same influence may also help him to make the complete surrender of himself at the feet of the Guru when found and to approach him with the further prayer for positive spiritual enlightenment. The mercy of Godhead will further enable such a person to be accepted by the Guru. The acceptance by the Guru of his offer of submission will be the beginning of his spiritual pupillage, and in proportion as he will be enabled to enter into the plans and views of the Guru by the method of loyal, willing, rational obedience, the true meaning of the deeds of Sri Krishna Caitanya will manifest themselves to his serving disposition. If he thereafter reads the narrative that has been handed down by the former serving teachers of the religion, the bona fide Akriyas, he will gain the positive knowledge of the truth. In the following pages of this work, the events of the career of Sri Krishna Caitanya, corresponding to the activity of the seeker of the truth after he has sought for and received spiritual enlightenment from the bona fide teacher of the truth, are recorded and interpreted in pursuance of the exposition of the Akriyas, by the method of the service of the bona fide spiritual guide. It will not be possible for the uninitiated to enter into the spiritual meaning of such a narrative, but everyone will be enabled to avoid forming any hasty and adverse opinion if he only keeps in mind the necessary reservations when going through the account of the happenings of the transcendental plane to which the conditioned soul has no access in their substantive sense. It can be to him more or less only like a story of the fairyland, with this difference that the realm of the soul is not the concoction of the fertile imagination of man as the other is, but on the contrary it is the only substantive reality that vitally concerns all of us both individually and collectively. No reader of a fairy tale ever thinks it worth his while to quarrel with any happenings in the fairyland, even if they are in flat contradiction to all experiences of this world. In the case of this narrative also, from this point onward, even if the reader is unable to agree with any proposition fully, he need not for an analogous reason cherish any feeling of hostility, inasmuch as the propositions have no direct application to the plane of three dimensions for which alone he is at present positively interested. His hostility against the fairyland would be like fighting with a shadow, as the land of the fairies is not capable of being affected by his mundane blows, and one should not quarrel with a shadow on principle. If one is disposed to quarrel by apprehending any bad effect that the story may appear likely to produce on his actual worldly position, he should still be able to find consolation in the reflection that his mere desire to banish from this world anything that he does not like will not necessarily rid it of those objectionable entities, and, therefore, if those entities are entitled to have a place in the world, it is the world that deserves to be condemned and not the story, which would be perfectly harmless but for this possibility of its existence in the world despite our desire to the contrary. We are not required either by our rational instinct or by the scriptures to shut our ears against anybody. It is only during pupillage that the student is required to obey the teacher, not mechanically but by the method of progressive cooperating conviction. The association with evildoers that is so strongly condemned by the scriptures is to be understood in the similar rational sense. The objectionable form of association with evil can arise only when we identify ourselves with the evil. It is not always practicable nor desirable to avoid external association with evil, but it is always practicable and desirable to have a protesting or at any rate an indifferent attitude towards evil. One must not be a consenting associating party with evil. A person is not capable of being contaminated by mere external association with evil, although he may be living in this world where even the light is as darkness. The attempt to avoid all association with evil by the mechanical method is only another form of association with evil. One who is impure at heart but fastidious in his external conduct is called in ordinary language a hypocrite, who is not less harmful and who is not to be less avoided than the downright professed scoundrel. There need not be any unnecessary mystery about spiritual matters. Everything is not intelligible to everyone. It is necessary also to adopt a method that is neither unintelligible nor misleading to the hearer. But nothing need be kept a secret unless it is impossible to be divulged without producing serious and harmful misunderstanding. The mantra is not to be divulged to another person, because this is quite a personal matter. It is also quite proper and logical to have the principles of reserve and privacy in the realm of the soul. It is not necessary to abuse those principles for securing transitory and narrow interests, as we do in this world. They are capable of being used and should by all means be used for serving the truth. This will no doubt give a chance to the hypocrite and the pseudo-teachers of religion to befool their over-credulous victims. But it should befool nobody who does not want to be befooled by their over-attachment to the bauble pleasures of this world. The nature of those funeral rites that are enjoined by the scriptures requires to be understood from the point of view of the service of Godhead. One's duty to one's parents does not cease with the death of the latter. This admission is not avoidable by those who recognize the claim of their parents to their duty in return of benefits received from them. The circle of such duties and benefits no doubt belong to the mundane plane. Death is the greatest calamity that may befall the relationship of parent and child. It severs the earthly connection between them. But does it really sever all connection? The elevationists do not believe it does. They suppose that the subtle body survives the death of the gross physical body. This subtle body has to be reborn after an interval during which it remains dissociated from the gross body. The subtle body embodies the principle of material enjoyment, but it does not obtain this enjoyment except through the gross body. The subtle body in the dissociated state is called the prita. The funeral rites are intended for the benefit of the prita. This benefit, as understood by the elevationists, smartest, consists in the rebirth of the prita in some other gross body. By such rebirth the prita is supposed to be delivered from his torments of the prita state. The salvationists on the other hand suppose that the prita is delivered if he is enabled to avoid rebirth in the gross body by merging in the divinity. The Vaishnavas do not recognize any special duty to their forebears, for the reason that such duty is rendered to the material case, which is wrongly identified by the elevationists and salvationists alike with the individual soul, who is the person to whom all duties are really due. The individual soul is not served by any function that is intended for the amelioration of the gross or subtle material case. The Vaishnavas accordingly express their duty towards their forebears and all departed persons by making their offering at the feet of Gadadhara. At Gaya the round of the funeral ceremonies leads up to the worship of the feet of Vishnu as their consummation. This is the relation in which the Smarta ceremonies are intended by the scriptures to stand to the spiritual function proper. The mains, i.e., souls imprisoned in the subtle bodies, are benefited by their descendants' worship of the feet of Gadadhara. The performance of funeral rites by Godhead himself is not to be supposed a concession to elevationist or salvationist method or objective. The avoidance of the ceremonies, by those who do not worship the feet of Gadadhara, is also not supported by the conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar. What it is intended to significant is that the Smarta practice is the result of gratitude that is naturally felt by a person who confounds himself with his physical cases towards the forebears of those cases. One who is in the deluded condition need not be hypocritically ungrateful to his worldly parents till he has been really relieved from the state of ignorance. He would be delivered from his ignorance and all supposed obligations of that state if he could attain to the pure service of the feet of Vishnu. This desideratum is recognized by the arrangement for the performance of the Shraddha ceremonies at Gaya leading up to the worship of the feet of Gadadhara. According to the dictum of the scriptures, a person who desires to attain to the service of Godhead should perform all duties enjoined by the custom of his society, or preferably by the Veda, in the way that is conducive to the attainment of the spiritual function. The Smarta view is that the devotee of Godhead is also under equal obligation to appease the mains by the performance of the Shraddha ceremonies. This is the reverse of the principle that is followed at Gaya in the due performance of the funeral rites. The Supreme Teacher recognized by his conduct the justification of the elevationist and salvationist function for the social purpose, while pointing to the attainment of the service of Godhead as the objective towards which all activities should tend if they are to possess any positive value for the soul. If any portion of the funeral ritual is opposed to this end, it is necessarily unacceptable to the Vaishnavas. For that reason, the ritual of Diksha or initiation is liable to be similarly misunderstood. The Smarta view of the ceremony is similar to their view of the funeral ritual. The Smarta is anxious to provide for the needs of the gross and subtle physical cares. He deliberately ignores the need of the soul, because that is opposed to the interests of the physical cases as understood by the smartest. The ceremony of Diksha, according to the smarta view, confers only on the Brahmana by seminal birth the eligibility for the worship of Sri Narayana. Those who are not Brahmanas by seminal birth are, according to this view, enabled by the process only to be born as Brahmanas in their next birth. But it does not entitle them to worship Sri Narayana in their present life. The Brahmana, who is eligible to worship Narayana or Godhead, is thus supposed to be the entity, viz. The physical cases, that is born of mundane parents. But as a matter of fact the physical cases have no access to Vishnu and the process of Diksha cannot accordingly apply to them, and for this reason Diksha is not a social but a spiritual function, the nature of which is misunderstood by those so-called Brahmanas who are anxious to retain intact their hereditary social privileges. By seminal birth, on the contrary, everyone is made a Sudra, who is the opposite of a Brahmana. The seminal birth provides the physical cases by which the conditioned soul is made subject to the sufferings of this world, or, in other words, is made a Sudra, which term literally means one who is subject to sorrow. By the purificatory ceremony of Apanyana, or being conducted to the Guru for attaining to the knowledge, Veda, of one's relationship with Godhead, Diksha, in order to be enabled to serve him on the spiritual plane, the Sudra is reborn, not as a physical or mental case but as a soul or student of the Veda. This second birth is not seminal birth, because the pupil, who submits to the Guru, is not the physical body born of semen but the soul inhabiting the same. The substantive consciousness, that one is not the physical body but the soul inhabiting the body, can alone enable one to serve the Guru for obtaining the true knowledge of the function of his own proper self. The ceremony of Apanyana, therefore, admits the necessity, on the part of the conditioned soul, of serving the Guru and represents the soul's act of appearing before the Guru in order to learn to serve Godhead. The ceremony of Diksha confers on the soul actual spiritual enlightenment. When the Guru is satisfied by the probationary test that the candidate for spiritual enlightenment possesses the genuine aptitude for service, he confers on him the knowledge of his relationship with Godhead, which enables him to serve Godhead. By means of Diksha a person is thus born a third time. It is a case not of seminal birth, but of the completion of the probationary stage of the spiritual pupillage of the soul. The purificatory process of Apanyana and Diksha are also proved to be necessarily open to all persons irrespective of seminal birth. The seminal birth can bestow only mundane aptitudes. The seminal birth cannot convey or entitle one to the spiritual nature. That which conveys or entitles to the spiritual nature is spiritual birth by Apanyana and Diksha. There is real analogy but a difference of plane between the seminal and spiritual birth. Apanyana is the process of being connected to the Guru. This refers to the function of the Shiksha Guru. The Shiksha Gurus may be many, but the Diksha Guru is only one. The Shiksha Gurus are the associated counterparts of the Diksha Guru, who is the associated counterrole of the divinity himself. There is thus only one Diksha Guru who is associated with his infinity of agents or limbs, whose function is to lead the intending disciple to the Diksha Guru. The Diksha Guru may, indeed, be also the Shiksha Guru, but not necessarily so. The distinction between the Shiksha Guru and the Diksha Guru is one relating to their respective spiritual functions, which do not involve any unwholesome implication of inferiority in the mundane sense. The Shiksha Guru is, therefore, to be as much obeyed by the disciple as the Diksha Guru himself. The function of Diksha, in its ritualistic aspect, consists of the process of imparting the mantra by the Diksha Guru, which is spoken by him into the ear of the disciple without being allowed to be heard by any other person. It is the method of truth communicating himself to an individual soul in the form of the transcendental sound appearing on the lips of his devotee. The mantra, as we have explained elsewhere, is the holy name in the form in which he is coupled with the process of self-dedication of an individual to the Guru. It is a specific matter that delivers the particular individual from the grip of all mental delusion by making him throw himself on the protection of the name under the exclusive direction of the Guru. The process of initiation is not a limited one. It is as much a continued process as the process of being helped by the Shiksha Guru for approaching the Diksha Guru. No one of these processes is capable of terminating as a limited result. They are eternally co-present in a relation that is progressive but without being hampered by the unwholesome imperfection of the principle of limitation. It has been necessary to explain the process of entry into the spiritual life in some detail for several reasons. A good deal of misconception has gathered round the issue. This misconception is responsible for the mushroom growth of an endless variety of pseudo-forms of the process that are being constantly manufactured by quacks and knaves for leading astray simpletons and rascals, by the offer of their support to diverse forms of pernicious worldly activities. It is not also easy to withstand the temptation of being misled by the appeal to the principle of pseudo-ethics manufactured by intellectualists for justifying a life of the sensualist's paradise, for belittling the spiritual issue which transcends the petty concerns of a 9-day existence. It is absolutely necessary to have this sense of perspective if one is not to miss the only purpose for which the subject treated in this work has been offered to his unbiased and serious consideration. Nothing is easier than to make a butt of ridicule of the concerns of the eternal life by the method of empiric buffoonery. There is an enormous literature that is also alarmingly growing in volume by leaps and bounds, which has been deliberately seeking to dissuade the limited mind from any thought of the absolute by covering, with their flimsy ridicule, all transcendental claims of religion. Such effusions may have been partly called forth by the somewhat natural reaction against the practices of the pseudo-religionists who unfortunately abound all over the world. They also serve the salutary purpose of checking the quarrels of the quacks and hypocritical followers of the different religious persuasions. But the warfare that is waged by atheism against the forms of pseudo-religion is also itself part and parcel of the opera show of our deluded existence. The history of the doings of man is full of instructive episodes in a short chapter of a real tragedy of errors which we are gravely asked to regard as the progressive march of an ethical civilization towards increasing perfection. The reader has had enough experience of regarding the doings of the performers on the worldly stage from this supposed optimistic and universally advertised promising point of view. It is not our business here to offer him more of the same familiar commodity. The real transcendental point of view is condemned by empiricists of all countries, with the exception of India and of those lands which have received their creeds from her, as being the hallucinate product of a sterile pessimism born of a decadent material civilization fretting over the solid achievements of successful rivals. India, which is the cradle and chosen land of the hankering for the realization of the transcendental existence, presents the spectacle of the continuing attempt to treat social issues by the scriptural method by refusing to admit the absolute value of mundane interests. No school of Indian philosophy professes to value social activity divorced from the spiritual purpose. The difficulty in this country is due not to the absence of traditional opinion in favor of the endeavor after the realization of the transcendental existence as distinguished from the mundane, but to the misunderstanding and mispresentation, by different schools of misguided exponents, of the nature of the spiritual function itself. Whereas in those countries, which are proud of possessing a social organization that is not priest-ridden and aims frankly at the multiplication and improvement of the opportunities of sensuous enjoyment and the hopeless amelioration of the inevitable consequences of the unhampered pursuit of this optimistic course, the difficulty is due to the absence of all traditional hankering for the attainment of the spiritual state. This last difficulty is infinitely increased by the misrepresentations of the whole body of empiric literature which is never tired of harping ad nauseam on the congenial theme of the glories of this mundane existence and holds up its nose in indignant scorn and contempt if the soundness of its wretched point of view is challenged by straight talk which it affects to invite so vehemently on its own side. It is not our purpose merely to condemn the activities of this world. We should really try to understand the nature of our proper relationship with them. We should not be willing to be satisfied with any hypothetical views on this all-important subject. We should not be violent lovers of the worldly sojourn without reservation, nor should we be prepared to desire its perpetuation as it is and as it is proposed to be made by those who derive their knowledge and wisdom from their experience of this world and apply them solely for further elaboration of our worldly activities on their present lines. We should long for an unobstructed vision of the absolute truth and believe in the possibility of the attainment of such vision, and to adjust our activities during this worldly sojourn to the requirements of our real and whole position revealed by the knowledge of the absolute truth. We should be disposed to regard the attitude that is content to be satisfied with less than the absolute truth as one of insidious and unpardonable revolt against the absolute truth. The present narrative offers a career that is wholly devoted to the service of the absolute truth. We are disposed to consider a pragmatist, if he does not possess the supreme regard due to the devotee of the absolute truth, as no better than a dangerous cheat and a sensuous hypocrite who wants only to indulge his aptitude for untruth under the guise of a mock concern for the truth. We, therefore, claim to be neither pessimists nor optimists in the sense in which the contending factions of the empiric sages array themselves under their respective worldly banners. We should share their furious interest on behalf of the worldly life. We only invite our readers to lend their receptive ear to the narration of the actual conduct of Nimai Pandit as he manifested himself to this world, after he had received spiritual enlightenment by unconditional submission to the feet of the bona fide spiritual guide. By the process of Diksha, with the intention of trying to enter the spirit of the same from the point of view of the narrative itself that has been handed down by the succession of the spiritual teachers. The boon for which Nimai Pandit prayed to Sri Iswarapuri was love for Krishna. He surrendered to Sri Iswarapuri his body and mind unconditionally for the attainment of the above purpose. When one obtains the actual sight of the bona fide spiritual guide, that is of the real exclusive servant of the Absolute, by the grace of Godhead, the duty that he has to perform on his side is to make the unconditional surrender of himself to the feet of the bona fide agent of the Absolute. This is the logical and consistent course but is impossible of realization in practice except by divine grace. If the complete surrender to the Guru is made, the spiritual mantra reveals himself to the disciple. It is now our task to trace the growth of this loving devotion in Nimai Pandit. But as we proceed to do so, we must bear in mind the fact that Nimai Pandit was, indeed, no other than the Lord himself. This is noticeable in the manner of Sri Iswarapuri towards his disciple. He says that when he looks at Nimai Pandit he obtains the bliss of beholding Krishna himself. The Vaishnava Guru does not regard anyone as his disciple, but he does not, therefore, think that his disciples are Krishna himself. The Vaishnava Guru regards his disciples as his gurus and himself as their disciple. The Vaishnava Guru regards his disciples as his gurus for the reason that as servants of his Lord they are really his gurus. The disciple, who is under agreement to serve the Lord, becomes, by that very agreement, in the estimation of the Guru to whom he is bound by the agreement, the servant of the Lord who is served by the Guru, and, therefore, his Guru. Iswarapuri would have been justified in addressing Nimai Pandit as his Guru after Nimai Pandit had agreed to become the servant of Krishna. But he did not call his disciple his Guru but said he was Krishna himself. This shows the real state of things as realized by Sri Iswarapuri. It is really the Lord who gave the boon of his mercy to Iswarapuri under the guise of receiving initiation from his Guru. Unless this point is properly grasped, there will be difficulty in following the subsequent developments. Sri Iswarapuri belonged to the communion of Sri Madhvatriya. Initiation at the hands of Sri Iswarapuri marks the entry of Nimai Pandit into the Madhva community. It was certainly not incumbent on the Lord to enroll himself under the banner of Madhva. This would prevent him, according to usage, from breaking away from the tenets of a particular community. It is well known that Sri Madhva did not teach the service of Sri Sri Radha Govinda which was preached and practiced by Nimai Pandit. There is thus only connection but not identity of teaching between Sri Caitanya and Sri Madhva. Sri Madhavendra Puri, the Guru of Sri Iswarapuri, was the first of the Akriyas to manifest his inclination, in an elementary form, for the worship of Krishna as his consort. In this respect he stands alone among the followers of Sri Madhva. For this reason the followers of Sri Caitanya regard Sri Madhavendra Puri as the germinating seed of the tree of loving devotion that was manifested to the world in its fully developed form by Sri Caitanya. These points of contact and difference will be dealt with more fully as we have occasion to examine, in the following pages, the details of the devotional developments of Nimai Pandit. The Lord accepted initiation from Sri Iswarapuri in order to satisfy the requirement of the scriptures that the mantra cannot be efficacious except within the spiritual communion. In other words, spiritual activity is not a wholly individualistic affair. We have seen above that the mantra concerns the individual as regards its reception and practice of recital. But at the same time the mantra withdraws the individual spiritually from the society of those who are uninitiated. If the individual continues his affinity with the uninitiated after his initiation in ways that are adverse to his newly formed spiritual connection, the mantra loses all its efficacy. This implies, and is a corollary from, the exclusive nature of the service of the Absolute and also lays down the nature of spiritual relationship among the servants of Godhead, which is categorically different from what prevails in the society of those who do not consciously serve the divinity. It was in order to observe this fundamental condition of entry into the spiritual sphere laid down in the scriptures that Nimai Pandit went through the form of spiritual initiation at the hands of Sri Iswarapuri, who belonged to one of the four theistic communities recognized by the scriptures. The new dispensation does not, therefore, claim that it is altogether new. It does not belie, but on the contrary only fulfills the requirements of the scriptures in the most effective manner. The scriptures had announced that the new dispensation for the Iron Age will be given by the Lord himself, and that the form of worship that will be thus established will be the congregational chant, Sankirtana. There was, therefore, sufficient scriptural authorization for the establishment of the new worship without reference to the existing theistic communities who possessed apparently somewhat different methods of worship. But the new dispensation was to be accomplished, and could be accomplished, according to the scriptures, and in no other way than by the recognition of the necessity of initiation into one of the authorized theistic communions. The Lord subsequently took the trouble of bringing about the spiritual reconciliation of the apparent differences of the four Vaishnava communities, by giving to the world the complete explanation of the function of the soul revealed by the scriptures. The teachings of Sri Caitanya in fact gathered up those of the former Akriyas in a scriptural synthesis of a supremely higher order. His full interpretation of the service of Sri Sri Radha Govinda, embodied in his career, is not identical with the teaching or practice of any of the four Vaishnava Akriyas, but the further and complete working out of the fundamentals of the teachings of all of them has been one of its inevitable achievements. That the mantra, which had been received by Nimai Pandit from Sri Iswarapuri, who had got it from Sri Madhabendrapuri, was to bear fruit in an ample measure, did not take a long time to manifest itself. Shortly after his initiation, as Nimai Pandit was one day engaged in meditating of the mantra in his privacy, the impulse of loving devotion, which had been gathering strength, burst through all restraints and showed itself in unique external manifestations. The Lord was heard to be crying with a loud voice in the act of reciting certain verses from the scriptures, the import of which is as follows: O Krsna, O my darling, Sri Hari, my life, oh, whither hast thou gone after stealing my heart? I, indeed, got my Lord, but where is he gone? The Lord went on crying and reciting these verses and rolling on the ground till his whole beautiful frame became grey with the dust, while he was thus immersed in the liquid bliss of loving devotion. The Lord, indeed, cried at the top of his voice in the pang of a deep agony, "Whither, darling Krishna, art thou gone, thus abandoning me?" His great restlessness under the impulse of loving devotion appeared all the more strange as the Lord had formerly been distinguished by the quality of his extreme reserve on the subject of religion. The Lord rolled on the ground and cried aloud. He was adrift on the ocean of loving separation from himself. This gradually brought all his pupils to the spot, who succeeded, after prolonged endeavors, with the greatest tenderness and loving care, in restoring him to his normal condition. But the Lord did not change his purpose. He now proposed to his students that they should at once return to their homes. He was resolved on his part not to enter the world again. He was resolved to go to Mathura to find Krishna, the Lord of his life. All the students appealed to him, by every possible method, to persuade him to be calm. But the Lord of Vaikuntha, deeply immersed in the rasa, mellowing liquid, of devotion, could find no rest in his heart under his great anxiety and did not know where to stay. In this condition the Lord, without the knowledge of any of his associates, set out for Mathura, by the impulse of love for Krishna. Towards the closing hours of night on one of these days, he moved forward on the road with the piteous cry, "O Krishna, O my darling, where shall I find thee?" When he had proceeded a certain distance in this manner, the Lord heard a celestial voice saying, "Jewel of the twice-born, forbear to go to Mathura for the present. There will come the proper time for going there. Thou wilt go there when the time will arrive. Retrace thy steps home to Nabadwap for the present. Thou art the Lord of Sri Vaikuntha. Thou hast appeared in the world for the deliverance of the people with all thy own. Thou wilt freely give away the treasure of loving devotion to the world by performing the Kirtana through the infinity of the worlds. Thou hast appeared in the world to give away to its denizens the good, by whose mellow quality Brahma, Shiva, Sanaka and their associates are distracted with joy, and which is sung by the great Lord Ananta himself. This is known to thyself. We are thy servants, and we speak as thou desirest. Therefore, have we made this submission at thy feet. Thou art Providence himself. Thou art the Master. What thou willst is never thwarted by opposition. Therefore, Supreme Lord, may thou be pleased to return to thy home. May thou come again to see the town of Mathura after a time. On hearing the voice from heaven, Sri Gaur Sundar was persuaded to retrace his steps with a glad heart. Coming back to his lodging, the Lord prepared to return home with all his disciples with the purpose of making manifest to the world the function of loving devotion to Krishna. The reader is introduced with staggering suddenness into an atmosphere which is not at all familiar to him in his normal mundane existence. If he is disposed to exercise his judgment at all, he might be inclined to suppose the exhibition of love for Krishna as the effect of a strong emotion on a naturally and extraordinarily sanguine temperament. But he is at once assured by Thakur Brindavandas that prior to his initiation Nimai Pandit did not wear his heart on his sleeves. He was, on the contrary, possessed of a depth of reserve that baffled all penetration. This is the description of an unusually balanced temperament. It also fully accords with the respect and dread with which, as a professor, Nimai Pandit was universally regarded by his fellow townsmen. His fame as professor had not remained confined to Nabadwip. The leading professor of Nabadwip was at that time, as now, the greatest savant of the whole country. All this implies neither a morbid sentimentalism nor the lack of a balanced intellect. Attempts have been made on the testimony of nobody but by most illogical inference from the events of his subsequent career regarded from the dishonest sceptic's point of view, to give publicity to the opinion that Nimai Pandit was never a particularly brilliant scholar. He was only the teacher of Vyakarana, which has been described by one of his associates, who became subsequently his devotee, as a subject of study fit for children. This, it has been supposed, proves that Nimai Pandit was not a great scholar. But this view does not take into consideration the testimony of the earliest accounts of his career, which informs us that he was the greatest scholar of Nabadwip of his time and in all branches of knowledge. They are also careful to inform us that it was his favorite pastime to go about the streets in the company of his pupils, challenging everyone to learn controversy with him in any branch of study. The work of Thakur Brindavandas was written within less than 40 years of the disappearance of the Lord. We find that the Lord met and defeated in open controversy all the scholars of all parts of India. This could not be regarded as even an exaggerated account of the neurotic performance of a mad sentimentalist. Those who are at all acquainted with the nature of theological controversies in India should be aware that it is no child's play to defeat an Indian pundit in open controversy in his subject. But there is far more convincing proof of his perfect rational sanity than all this. The theological system, which is the teaching of Sri Caitanya, remains intact to this day. Some indications of its nature have already been available to the reader of the foregoing pages of this narrative. It is for the reader to judge whether they constitute a revolutionary and unparalleled advance on every system of every school that has been prevalent in the world before or since his time. But that which has been placed before the reader is only that infinitesimally small portion what bears to be conveyed in the defective vocabulary that is at our disposal for the purpose. No vocabulary of this world can touch even the outermost fringe of the absolute truth, whose complete face is presented by the career of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, the Absolute himself, in the agony of an endless striving for beholding himself as he really is. The difficulty that the worldling has to overcome in order to be won to a rational faith in the transcendental nature of the Absolute is that he is made by all his cherished habits of education and association to believe implicitly in the testimony of his senses. When Nimai Pandit is found by one's eyes to be no more than a human being like oneself, it should be impossible to be won over by mere theological arguments to a stable conviction of his transcendental nature. It would be still less possible to believe in his divinity by the same method. This natural disinclination to believe in his transcendence would not be diminished by the closest possible scrutiny of his career from the confirmed empiric point of view. The ordinary empiric attitude is to expect to find transcendence in the form that must wholly bewilder the understanding by the manner of a miracle. If Nimai Pandit possesses a body which can be touched by my hands, seen by my eyes, how can such body be regarded as something really extraordinary? Nothing mundane is ordinarily expected to be found in the mundane sense in the truly transcendental. Should not, therefore, Nimai Pandit, if he is really transcendental, have nothing in common with us according to mundane expectation? The reply to such questions has already been given more than once in the course of this narrative. Transcendence does not mean the denial of the mundane. It simply means that the transcendent is inconceivable to our present understanding. For example, it was inconceivable to his contemporaries that Nimai Pandit is really a transcendental person. This is quite in conformity with the peculiar characteristic of transcendence. It need not obey, it is sure to belie, all expectations of its mundane observers. No imagining on the part of the empiricists, by the negative method of analysis of mundane experience, can enable him to get to the real plane of transcendence. It is only by the mercy of the latter that he can have any access to him. Transcendence reserves the right of showing, or not showing, himself to the mundane spectator. He refuses to disclose his nature to one who does not desire to serve the truth. This is not at all unreasonable, as we all recognize the paramount duty of serving the truth in order to be enabled to realize our own proper nature by reference to the truth. The theory of miracle, in the sense in which the term is ordinarily supposed to stand for a transcendental occurrence, must be wholly discarded if we are to be enabled to approach the subject of transcendence in the truly scientific way. The power of performing miracles, in the ordinary sense of that term, cannot and need not be attributed to the divinity. The transcendence of Godhead consists in this, that he does not require any extraneous proof of his divinity to maintain his transcendence. He is everything without being anything. This is the real nature of his transcendence. Godhead has been accordingly described in the Bhagavata as possessing a medium form. In other words, there is prima facie nothing extraordinary at all about Godhead as he really is. This is the proof of his supreme freedom from all form and convention. The divinity is also declared to have a specific form of his own who is like the human. This is not proved to be untrue for the reason that it is nothing apparently extraordinary to the judgment of man. The human form of the divinity is not the human form of non-divine man. Sri Krishna is free from all limiting connotations of the term man and is at the same time human in a manner that is inconceivable to man himself. Such a view no doubt provides a capital opportunity for cheats and hypocrites to come forward as the avatars of Godhead, an opportunity that has not also failed to be exploited in the most shameless way, especially in this country. But the exhibition of such monstrous wickedness by all the sinners of this world will be no palliative for the error of those who are, with equal hypocrisy, thereby led to hold to any belief which they know very well to be radically opposed to their own basic conception of the nature of the divinity. No hypocrisy, not even that of the most subtle kind, is naturally permitted to trespass into the realm of the Absolute, for the simple reason that it happens to be a revolt against the service of the truth as he is. Nimai Pandit cries like a madman for Sri Krishna. He does nothing else, but always longs for the sight of Krishna. Who then is this Nimai Pandit, and who also is this Sri Krishna to whom he realizes himself to be so exclusively attached by love? We have to turn to the Bhagavata for understanding the meaning of this extraordinary conduct. The shlokas, which Nimai Pandit was reciting as he wept loudly in his agony of separation from Krishna, are to be found in the Bhagavata. Krishna is leaving for Mathura. The shlokas express the grief of the milkmaids on that occasion. It is on the plain of Bra that Nimai Pandit finds himself in consequence of his initiation. He is turned into a denizen of Bra that is now his real plane, while this world only serves to increase his sense of separation from Krishna. In order to enable the reader to avoid any gross misunderstanding of the nature of the spiritual function itself, manifested in the activities of Nimai Pandit from this time, we shall try to set forth in the next chapter a few additional considerations towards the elucidation of his conduct as devotee of Krishna. Chapters Ksiv, his initiation, and after the method of service by the mood of separation is the distinctive feature, the differential as it were, of the religion of pure devotion that is exhibited by the conduct of Nimai Pandit after his initiation. It is this which makes the religion of pure devotion the antipode of the worship of material energy by the mood of enjoyment represented by the gross type of the Shakta cult. The worship of Godhead, being located on the transcendental plane, cannot be practiced in its positive or substantive form on the material plane. But neither is the spiritual function performed by the method of abstention from material enjoyment. The method of abstention is a radically unnatural, hypocritical and pessimistic attitude. Why should a person abstain from the ordinary activities of this world? If one loses any organ of sense, should it be regarded as any cause for congratulation in itself? Any deliberate attempt to be deprived of the functions of all the senses cannot be supposed, for the same reason, to be either desirable or equivalent to any positive function on the transcendental plane. Moreover, the process itself of being deprived of one's senses is really impracticable. Any offense against physical nature is automatically punished by an equally violent reaction. Nature always takes her revenge. The sensuous aptitude is the natural condition for the physical body under the direction of the mind, which is dependent on the sense organs for all its activities. This is the fact. The world is not an illusion, to be got rid of by the mere desire of any person. Those who believe in the philosophy of illusion and the omnipotence of the mind fall thereby only more deeply into the clutches of the sensuous nature. The victims of cynicism may not be themselves prepared to admit the sterile failure of their cherished misconceptions, but it is nonetheless patent to all impartial observers. When, therefore, it is stated that Sri Gaur Sundar practiced the pure devotion of Krishna by the mood of separation, as distinct from that of material enjoyment practiced by the elevationists or materialistic Shaktas, it is not to be supposed that he necessarily belonged to the opposite camp of equally materialistic ascetic salvationists. As a matter of fact, he belonged to neither materialist camp. He was acting according to the pure dictates of the soul when he wakes from his mundane stupor to find himself wholly off his proper plane in this world. The plank of the elevationists as well as of the salvationists offered him the alternative aspects of the perverted spiritual function that prevails on the mundane plane. Elevationism is fruitful of transitory positive activities which are essentially irrational in their nature, although they seem to be true for a time. While salvationism offers freedom from the round of such activities by substituting in place of the positive a number of impracticable, negative, equally irrational and transitory activities. The stuff in either case is the same, viz., an unintelligible existence depending on the physical senses for its functioning. It is, therefore, no wonder that the salvationist should consider himself saved only by his total immunity from the shackles of his present unwholesome existence as a thinking individual with compulsory, positive, tantalizing functions. The quarrel between elevationism and salvationism is as old as the hills. It has also remained the eternal Gordian knot which cannot be untied by any earthly thinking. Each can be justified only by including the other, which is logically its direct negation. This vicious circle is the very plane of all empiric thinking on the subject of itself. Nimai Pandit was perfectly aware of the insoluble nature of this problem of empiricism, and he took care not to embrace either of those alternatives. He found himself instead on the real positive plane of the absolute. This plane is not one of sensuous activities at all. On the mundane plane the senses demand their own gratification. On the spiritual plane the senses are found to be absolutely free from this hankering. The sensuous hankerings of the elevationists are capable of being only suppressed. The salvationists are never cured of their longing for material enjoyment, which is indirectly or directly the very stuff of all existence on the material plane. If I suddenly find myself on a plane where the senses do not require their own gratification, I should be left without any motive for active existence. This is the seemingly rational conclusion of the salvationists. But Nimai Pandit did not find that it is really so. He found that he was being prevented from exercising the proper function of his senses by his separation from the only object towards whom it is worthy of being performed. He found no worthy function to be performed by his senses towards this world. He desired an infinity of functions to be performed towards the Absolute. But the Absolute had ceased to be accessible to him after a sudden momentary revelation. This was the plight in which he found himself. The empiric critic might be inclined to agree to this for a reason of his own. He may think that such a state is identical with the goal of the salvationists. If Nimai Pandit did nothing but cry for Krishna night and day, did he not thereby limit himself to the minimum of barren transitory performances, which is the cherished goal of ascetic salvationists? But as a matter of fact, the ascetics themselves of that period did not recognize the performances of Nimai Pandit as coming under the requirements of salvationism. They said that he was only a soft-hearted sentimentalist. They scorned his company and his philosophy as being utterly incompatible with a life of austerities. Nimai Pandit was, therefore, out of his element both among elevationists and salvationists. Neither could he find any other footing of his own in this world. Thereupon he behaved as one who is distraught with a great sorrow, and found no consolation except in the talk of Krishna. His sorrow was that he had found Krishna, but that he had been immediately forsaken by him. He had lost sight of him, but he could not live without seeing him. His only concern was to find him again. He was interested in the company and talks of those who were attached to Krishna and who might enable him to find Krishna. He had no duties till he found Krishna. Can such a person be described as a salvationist who seeks freedom from the miseries of his individual existence? Or can he be regarded as an elevationist who is bent upon finding his goal in the gratification of his own senses? Nimai Pandit gave up all earthly occupation from the moment of his initiation, devoting himself heart and soul to the search for Krishna. Did he also expect to find him? He was engaged in this search for the rest of his career. The search served to intensify the pang of separation from his only beloved. He ceased at first to care for the ordinary duties of a householder and finally renounced the world and lived away at Puri, far from his widowed mother and loving consort, who were left to be taken care of by, and to care for, Krishna in his place. Such a course, although at first sight it seems to bear a close external resemblance to Salvationism, is radically different from the same. To love Krishna is the summum bonum of all animation. The love for Krishna had been aroused in Nimai Pandit as the result of his initiation. But from the very beginning it had the form of the anguish of loving separation from the object of his love. This was the fulfillment, brought about by the process of initiation, of his spiritual need. He had gained the summum bonum in this form. If one is seriously disposed to settle down in a contented mood in this world, such a person cannot be regarded as possessing an iota of real love for Krishna. Krishna is never to be found in this world. It is also necessarily impossible to serve one who cannot be found. A person who is favored by the sight of Krishna is thereby deprived of all taste for the life on the plane of sensuous existence that alone is available in this world. In this terrible predicament, what is such a person to do for passing his time? Krishna shows himself to the neophyte only once, at the moment of the fulfillment of the probationary stage of his spiritual pupillage, and immediately vanishes from his view. This, indeed, sets him on the real quest. Till the novice has been favored by the sight of Krishna, he has no love for the real Krishna. The instant he is blessed by the sight of Krishna, he finds Krishna to be his only beloved and he is ready with the offer of his all for his service. But Krishna has no need for the things of this world. The pure soul, who has once been blessed by the sight of Krishna, is thereby enabled to know also this perfectly well. He, therefore, on his part does not expect nor want that Krishna should actually allow himself to be served by the offerings of mundane things. In other words, that form of worship, which bears the scriptural designation of arcana, cannot also have an exclusive attraction for such a person. It is possible to worship Godhead by means of the objects and thoughts of this world. But this form of worship can be but symbolical at its very best. It is not possible to attain to the substantive spiritual service of Godhead on the mundane plane. But notwithstanding this necessary reservation, the process of worship represented by arcana possesses the greatest value during the period of novitiate on the path of spiritual endeavor. It is not also correct to say that arcana is symbolical worship. It should be described as the practice of learning to regard all mundane objects as being unacceptable to Godhead. The food, which is offered to Krishna by the process of arcana, is not the mundane eatable, but it is nevertheless offered to him by uttering the formula that the act of such offering is only the mental function which has a correspondence in the spiritual sphere, and that the offering is therefore made by means of the formula which shields the worshipper against mistaking the mundane act for the spiritual. The person who performs arcana is required, as the initial act of the process, to try to realize that it is his soul who is offering worship. After this attitude has been assumed, the object of worship and the articles of offering are regarded as further items in a corresponding function. The mantras impress this vital difference on the mind of the worshipper. All this precaution is necessary in order to guard oneself against the profane error that the articles of offering or any mundane figure of the object of worship to whom they are offered, or the mind or body of the worshipper, are the entities engaged in the service of Godhead on the spiritual plane. The mantra says that they are not. The arcana, however, is not a symbolical process. The worshipper is instructed not to suppose that he is doing anything which can be conceived, either symbolically or otherwise, as at all like the spiritual process on which he is engaged. The mantra forbids him to exercise his mind at all on the subject. The consideration that affords the real clue to the spiritual significance of the method of arcana as a valid form of worship is to be sought elsewhere than in the visible items actually employed in the worship. The process derives its spiritual value from the fact that it has the sanction of Godhead himself. It is, of course, perfectly conceivable that a person should be disposed to cherish the firm conviction that no entities of this world can have any locus standi on the spiritual plane. It should also be possible to devise an infinite variety of forms and processes of worship based on such conviction. But if the conviction were acted up to under those forms, would it help us to get rid of our present doubts and difficulties? Our unbiased reason should hold out no hope of any such possible consummation. But if once it could be rationally admitted that the process has the sanction of Godhead, we would have no further objection to it even on the rationalistic grounds. In other words, it is not sufficient for any form of worship to be rationalistic in the conditioned sense. The rational instinct itself requires that there must be a supernatural sanction, not for reinforcing the rational but for endowing it with the substantive spiritual value. Human emotion is as much a mundane phenomenon as human reason. And, therefore, the mere addition of human emotion to an imperfectly rational process will not make the function a religious practice even in the rational sense. It should, therefore, be possible for a human being to gain the goal of spiritual endeavor only by the pursuit of a scriptural process. But what is this goal in itself? Sri Chaitanya's conduct shows that it consists partly of the realization of the categorical difference that separates the mundane from the spiritual. This realization is effected by the momentary vision of the reality as he is. The vision is attained only for a moment in this life by the due performance of the arcana and as the supreme fulfillment of the process. Should the process be, therefore, continued even after the vision has been attained? The answer should be in the affirmative. It should now be possible for the worshipper to perform the worship in the manner that is required by the mantra. The mantra will now be consciously applied. But the resulting process, although there has been no external difference, will have been wholly changed as regards its significance and something more for the worshipper. The worshipper is now no longer under the obligation of avoiding to exercise his mind on the impossible. He is now conscious of the nature of the spiritual process by reason of his spiritual experience. The function itself has thus become quasi-spiritual. After this stage has been reached, it is optional for him to continue to worship the archa image by means of the symbols. Nimai Pandit gave up the method of Arshaha shortly after his initiation when he found it impossible to go through the process by reason, not of his opposition to the principle of arcana but by the discovery of his actual incapacity for the due performance of the valued ceremony. This point will be taken up again at the proper place. It is the fuller realization of the spiritual that is the cause of the non-attachment of the devotee in the higher stages of spiritual endeavor, alike to the concrete and abstract forms of the mundane. The activities on the mundane plane are not discarded in the ordinary sense by the realization of their spiritual worthlessness, as the Salvationist avers. All activities are expanded by a change of plane into quasi-spiritual performances. The devotee in this stage appears to an external observer as being neither attached nor averse to mundane activities, but he is not found to be devoid of all interest. He is found to be partial to hearing and talking about Krishna and unconditionally serving those who serve Krishna by the true method. With the change of his point of view, the nature of Nimai Pandit's normal activities underwent only the corresponding alterations. The nature of this change is not conceivable to one who is bent upon confounding the spiritual with the mundane. Neither can a mere pessimist, a mere scorner of the things of this world, enter into the purpose of the pure devotee of Vishnu. His case bears a distant analogy to that of the lovelorn maiden separated from her sweetheart. She is not unmindful of the duties of the household on principle, but she cannot also avoid being unmindful. Her seemingly deliberate neglect of ordinary duties need not be objected to on economic and utilitarian grounds in consideration of her inner condition. It is no part of our duty to neglect the concerns of this world any more than to be wholly engrossed with transitory mundane interests. Those interests have a real, although temporary, value during our sojourn in this world. But they are by no means the only interests. They need not be cultivated in the spirit that they are our permanent interests. They concern the perishable and changing physical body and mind. They can have no relation to the eternal. If the soul can subsist independently of the body and mind, why should it be at all his duty to engage himself in supplying their so-called needs? It is certainly necessary, if these so-called duties are to be performed with the solace of any real conviction of their necessity for our souls, to inquire in what way, if any, they can really supply the needs of the soul. As soon as this necessity for inquiring about the needs of our soul is seriously experienced, we drift into the process of arcana by whatever name we may choose to designate the ensuing function. The essence of arcana consists in seeking to do every duty of this world by a considered reference to the paramount needs of the soul. The attainment of such an attitude is practicable in this world. Otherwise there would be no way of the redemption of conditioned souls. The arcana develops into bhajana, or actual spiritual service, which is the function proper of the soul and which manifests itself to the view of this world as a causeless hankering for association with Krishna involving internal dissociation from all mundane concerns. There is a still higher form of worship, viz. That which was exhibited by Nimai Pandit during the concluding 12 years of his Leela at Puri. During that long period he did nothing but listen to the discourses of the pastimes of the divine pair from the lips of his most confidential associates, Swarup Damodar and Rai Ramananda, in the strictest seclusion of his own private chamber. All stages of worship of the Absolute that are available on the mundane plane to conditioned souls are of the nature of the unrealized quest of the Absolute. It is never possible, so long as the mortal coil persists, to know Krishna as he is. If it had been possible to know him in that way, the function would be substantively eternal. Nimai Pandit was apprised of this by the actual vision of the object of worship. It had made him realize that it is not possible to serve Krishna by the method of arcana laid down in the scriptures, and that it is really impossible to serve Godhead on the mundane plane. The method of arcana undoubtedly possesses the merit of being the legitimate form of endeavor available on this mundane plane, the conditioned souls by the grace of Godhead, for realizing the spiritual service of Krishna in Sri Brindavana, the eternal realm of the divinity. But the arcana is nevertheless only an endeavor for realization. It is not the realized service. The more strongly and fully this unbridgeable gulf that thus effectively separates arcana from bhajana is realized by the endeavoring soul, one is bound to lose in proportion his confidence in the method of arcana. The realization comes to him in the shape of the sense of utter inadequacy and impropriety of the available method. In other words, one does not become more sensuous, but one realizes that no form of activity, possible on this mundane plane, can possess the substantive spiritual nature of the divine service proper. Such a person must still continue to retain his regard for arcana, but he is unable to be satisfied by merely remaining on the steps of the ladder by lacking the means of the performance of the actual service of his beloved. It is this mood that has been termed Vipralambdha by the Akriyas, who are self-realized, practicing, authorized teachers of the pure substantive eternal function. The word Vipralambdha means the mood of separation from one's only beloved. Godhead can be fully served on the mundane plane only by the growing realization of one's utter separation from him. This is the sine qua non of the teaching of Nimai Pandit. It is from after his initiation that he began to practice this hitherto unrevealed form of the religion of pure devotion. Those who consciously exhibit by the manipulation of their external conduct that they are actuated by the mood of separation commit the blunder of supposing that they possess the thing which alone it is certainly desirable to have. Any real manifestation of genuine self-contradiction of this kind in the conduct of a person who is actually distraught with the uncontrollable anguish of separation from the divinity need not also be willfully undervalued. The condition of the loyal, loving wife is certainly to be preferred to that of the harlot. If it is not possible to serve Krishna really on the mundane plane, one who desires to serve him at all should show his sincerity by submitting to undergo the preliminary training in the form of the arcana, and must patiently and loyally wait for the realization of his desire when he is actually lifted to the higher plane by the grace of Godhead by his own promise recorded in the scriptures. But for the sincere soul there can be no meaning in simulating a condition simply because it resembles in its external feature that of Nimai Pandit. If one goes into the streets weeping and crying aloud the name of Krishna, such an act should be discouraged by all means. If such a person is really actuated by the bona fide sense of separation from Godhead, he should be expected to exhibit his mood only to his confidential sympathizers, as Nimai Pandit took care to do. Nimai Pandit realized that the whole world is steeped in atheism, and that therefore it would be crying in the wilderness to ask them to listen to the tale of his woes. Notwithstanding all this precaution and apprehension, he could not always control his real sentiments. But whenever he chose to exhibit them openly, they only served to strengthen the general misconceptions against Krishna. They were so utterly opposed to the method of arcana enjoined by the scriptures that nobody, who was not himself very far advanced on the path of spiritual endeavor, could be expected to understand what it really was. It was only Sribas Pandit who could recognize in it the very highest form of devotion, and accordingly proposed that Nimai Pandit might be pleased to perform the Sankirtana of Krishna in his courtyard, where all the Vaishnavas would join the holy function and from where all other persons would be excluded. The scriptures reveal Krishna through the medium of language. The sadhu reveals Krishna through his spoken words and every activity. But the spoken word is the source of all manifestations of Krishna on the mundane plane. The name of Krishna is the supreme, all-sufficing, spoken word. The name of Krishna is identical with Krishna and possesses all the powers of Krishna. The name of Krishna has greater potency than any other form of divine manifestation. The person who can utter the name of Krishna without offense is the purest of sadhus. By the service of the best of sadhus one acquires eligibility for uttering the name of Krishna without offense. The only method of serving the pure sadhu consists in uttering the name of Krishna without offense in his company. The companionship of the sadhu helps the realization of that mode of life which is free from offense against Krishna. The sole motive for leading such a life is to be enabled to realize Krishna in the form of taking his name without offense. If one calls upon the name of Krishna only once with the really sincere motive of service, he is freed from all worldly entanglements for good. This simple creed Shribas Pundit was enabled to understand by the mercy of Nimai Pundit as embodying the complete significance of all the scriptures. The conditioned soul can only try to sincerely call upon the name of Krishna. If he wants to do anything else, he is bound to go astray. He is in utter need of receiving all enlightenment from Krishna. The sense of this supreme need makes itself felt in its truly effective form only to the person who is sincerely desirous of leading a life of which the sole object is to conduce to the pleasure of Krishna. Such a life is made available for the conditioned soul by the grace of the sadhu who has himself attained the same position. The need for the grace of the sadhu is, therefore, the fundamental fact in the method by which spiritual enlightenment is to be sought by the conditioned soul. The sadhu is not a denizen of this phenomenal world. The conditioned soul is not a sadhu. The redeemed soul is, indeed, a sadhu. But the process of redemption does not mean that the physical body and mental body of the conditioned soul are turned thereby into spiritual essences. There is no transformation of the mundane into spiritual. Just as the pure soul is liable to be enveloped by the double casing of the physical body and mental sheath on attainment of the conditioned state, in like manner the redeemed soul finds his material casings in their turn capable of being coated or saturated with the substantive principles of spiritual cognition and bliss. This is in perfect keeping with our experience of the known phenomenon of the conditioned state. If the conditioned state is possible without the necessity of changing the essence of the soul, the redeemed state should also be possible without transforming the material casings. But the sadhu has no material casings at all. The redeemed soul resembles a sadhu in his function inasmuch as he is in a position to render his service to the Supreme Lord unhampered by the presence of his actual material coverings. The sadhu is the soul himself without the encumbrance of material coverings. But the sadhu appears to the vision of conditioned souls in the guise of the possessor of material cases, or rather the form of the sadhu to the view of the mundane spectator, i.e., the conditioned soul, appears to be like the material case. If it be asked how the conditioned soul can at all see those material cases if the sadhu really has them not, the answer is that whatever the conditioned soul is permitted to see with his material eyes appears to him like material casing. No mortal eye is permitted to see the agent of Godhead as he really is. Let us have recourse to a mundane analogy for avoiding any possible misunderstanding of this all-important point. If a live tiger could find his way into the bioscopic show, the spectators should have no cause to suspect that there is any material difference in the show by his appearance, unless, indeed, the tiger chooses to come out of the picture to prove to the spectators that he is really no part of the painted show. But if the tiger is content to behave as a harmless actor inside the show, no spectator need suspect that he is not the painted picture of the live animal. This impression of the spectators, however bona fide it may be, will be still in flat contradiction to the real fact, provided the tiger is actually the live animal instead of being the show that he looks. The sadhu possesses the power of entering into the bioscopic show of this world in order to come within the range of the ocular vision of mundane spectators, without being really a part of the show. This is the real nature of the appearance of the sadhu on this mundane plane. His visible body is not any product of this phenomenal world any more than the body of the tiger is painted show. What appears to the mundane spectator as the physical body of the sadhu is not the picture in the show, although it resembles the same to his view, but the form of the soul. The least gesture of the form of the soul is, therefore, a spiritual event. This can be known to the spectator only if he is inclined to submit to the sadhu for being initiated into the otherwise impenetrable secret. There are no doubt lots of bogus persons who are passing themselves off as sadhus as an easy way of gratifying their sensuous appetites at the expense of their victims. But the undoubted existence of the bogus sadhu can be no rational cause for disbelieving the existence of the real sadhu. The bogus sadhu does not practice the service of Godhead, nor does he propose to teach his disciple the same. The bogus sadhu cannot teach his pupil the conduct that is enjoined by the scriptures in regard to one who is anxious to attain to the spiritual service of Godhead. One who is anxious to find the genuine sadhu, however, can never go astray. The only thing that a person is required for finding the bona fide sadhu is to be true to himself. If one is insincere, he has no chance of finding the sadhu and has to thank only himself for his dire misfortune. If it be asked how an insincere person can be made sincere, the reply should be that no one is altogether insincere. It is not possible for a person to have a thing for which he possesses no aptitude. Everyone has got the faculty in an explicit or latent form. One is only asked to exercise the function in its full measure. The appeal of the sadhu is made to the higher nature of every person, which is fully sincere. The higher nature is deluded into supposing that it is the same as the lower nature, which also is found in every person. It is the function of the sadhu to impress upon all persons that the one is categorically different from the other, and to insist that the lower nature should be made to occupy a position of subordination to the higher. The sadhu says in effect to the insincere person, "You are really sincere, as you possess the higher nature. You have become insincere by supposing that you have an obligation to your lower nature. Any indulgence of your lower nature is partial or total denial of your obligation to the higher nature. The higher should be allowed to dictate your duty to the lower nature, and not vice versa. It is, therefore, your only duty to be true to your higher nature. Your higher nature has got no other function than to serve the Absolute. It is in a position to do so even by the resources of your lower nature when the latter happens unavoidably to be in his way. But it is possible, nay normal, for your higher nature to refuse to take any help of the lower in serving the Absolute. It is also possible for your higher nature, i.e., your soul, to compel the lower, i.e., the physical body and mind, to be employed in the service of the Absolute during his temporary sojourn in this world. The insincere man may, indeed, pretend to hold that inasmuch as the service of the Absolute is only open to the higher nature, who is perfectly sincere, it can be no business of a person who is insincere to bother about the service of Godhead. The weak point of such contention is brought out when we remember that the function of denying the higher nature would be impossible except by connivance of the higher nature himself. Such obstinacy of the insincere person is, therefore, nothing short of a gross and deliberate suicidal folly on the part of the soul. Of course, it is open to the soul to choose to commit suicide and to say wrongly that he is being compelled to do so. But as a matter of fact, there is and can be no necessity for insincerity. The most hardened sinner can be such only by option. He cannot also be redeemed unless he chooses similarly to be a really consenting party. He can be redeemed by the sadhu only with his own consent, by the method of his unconditional submission to the Absolute. The sadhu enables a repentant sinner to obtain the strength required for such submission even in the otherwise impossible surroundings of this mundane world. The sadhu never asks for more than it is really in one's power, by one's sincere conviction, to give. Once the bona fide candidate for spiritual enlightenment finds himself in presence of the sadhu, he recognizes in him the transcendental guide of whose help he stands in such absolute need. There is no danger in making one's unconditional submission to the bona fide servant of the Absolute. If one really seek the exclusive service of the truth, one finds the person who is capable of instructing him in his service. The teacher of the Absolute is incapable of deceiving any person. He may find it necessary to advise an insincere person to shun the society of insincere persons by any pretext that may tend to aggravate the malady. But the sadhu is never the enemy of any person. This is instinctively realized by all who are themselves sincerely engaged in the quest of the eternal service of the Absolute. When the candidate for spiritual service is enabled to be really established on the path of the Absolute by the causeless grace of the pure devotee, he is liable to be set upon by all the deluding forces of the limiting energy for pulling him down to the mundane plane if he is found to cherish any lurking insincerity. If he stands the test, he is also cured of his worldly hankering and assured of unhampered progress on the path of divine service. The crisis of his life naturally makes the neophyte extraordinarily sensitive to the dangers of his position and makes him properly enough desirous of avoiding all association with non-sadhus lest he be misguided by their advice. The new experience is nothing less than the sudden revelation to the spiritual consciousness of the neophyte of his relationship to the Absolute, which makes him realize the function of serving Krishna as the only thing needful. The sight of Krishna excites an unpreventable disposition for his service, which is recognized as the summum bonum. Thenceforward the only function of the awakened soul resolves itself into a sleepless endeavor for retaining and augmenting his newborn attachment to the lotus feet of Krishna. There is a real danger of losing one's attachment to Krishna as long as the physical cases continue to be in one's way. By their means it is always practicable to cultivate the contrary disposition of seeking one's own sensuous gratification from the things of this world. The presence of the two material bodies is also an effective bar in the way of all access to the substantive plane of the Absolute. The service that it is possible for the redeemed soul to render while he still continues to retain the entanglements of his material cases is probationary service under the unconditional guidance of the sadhu. The whole duty of such a soul consists in obeying the sadhu. Krishna has, indeed, been seen by the grace of the sadhu, but the vision is not capable of being retained till Krishna is pleased to divest the soul of his mortal coils. The memory, however, persists by the grace of the sadhu. If the service of the sadhu is relaxed, the memory about Krishna also tends to lose its spiritual significance. It is only by the continuous and exclusive service of the sadhu that one has any chance of retaining the memory of the divine event. If there is no real memory, there can be no real relationship with the Absolute. No amount of punctilious observance of external conduct can restore to one's activities the spiritual character when once the tie of living memory is snapped. The sadhu cannot be served in the way in which a person of this world is said to be served. The sadhu is a transcendental person. He can be served only on the transcendental plane. He is not served by the mundane aptitude of his service holder. This is the meaning of the scriptural dictum that it is only by the method of unconditional obedience that the sadhu has to be served. The way in which the sadhu requires to be served and is actually served by his disciples cannot for this reason be at all understood by the uninitiated. Empiricists may think that they are justified in adversely criticizing the perfectly pure conduct of the devotee from the angular point of view of their mundane plane. They are apt to think that if the devotee really belongs to the transcendental plane, his conduct would be of an extraordinary kind and would also appear as such to all mundane spectators. Empiricists expect miracles and are prepared to serve only persons who are able to gratify their atheistical demands. But the devotee of Krishna lives above all expectations and performances of the worldling. It is no part of his business to seek to satisfy any expectations of any mundane person. It is the only duty of the worldling to try to understand in a spirit of humility and reverence why the sadhu claims to be able to serve the Absolute without having to perform miracles that alone are claimed to be recognized as spiritual manifestation by unbelievers. When Sri Krishna Chaitanya did nothing but cry for the sight of Krishna after he had been initiated into the transcendental service of Godhead by the grace of Sri Iswarapuri, his contemporary worldly spectators affected to regard his conduct to be absolutely sterile and wholly below the mark of their fanciful theories of the spiritual function. They could have been mystified by the manifestation of miraculous powers, and some would have fallen at his feet for obtaining boons in the shape of extended scope for the gratification of their sensuous appetites. But all were sadly disappointed when they discovered that the conduct of Sri Krishna Chaitanya did not offer the least prospect of their worldly advancement. They turned into relentless opponents of the Lord when they found out later that the teachings of Sri Chaitanya were necessarily most radically opposed to their own cherished supposed interests and convictions. Those who hold the view that the practice of spiritual service of Sri Krishna is conducive of social, political or physio-communal welfare, betray utter ignorance of the nature of the elementary principles of the function of the soul in the state of grace. Social, political or so-called personal welfare can be the cry only of those who are actually in a state of want. The soul in his spiritual essence is self-satisfied. He requires no external condition for the perfection or augmentation of his happiness. To the pure soul, the proposal of being made happy would be as unacceptable as that of being rendered unhappy. He covets neither. He has no reason to covet them even if he could know, because he is eternally located on a plane to which those considerations are absolutely foreign and inapplicable. The boatman of the fable conceived the ridiculous ambition of spreading prospective quilts on the thorny banks of the river when he would become a king, in order that his bare feet might no longer be hurt in the process of tugging at the line of his boat. He could not imagine that it would not be necessary at all for him to pull at the line on actually becoming a real king. The amenities coveted by the conditioned soul refer only to the mundane plane and the adventitious material casings. The soul, when he is really free from those casings, has nothing to do with any physico-mental prospect offered by the mundane world. The real problem of the conditioned soul is located beyond the limited outlook of his fettered mental understanding. The problem for the conditioned soul is one of finding a method of realizing the inconceivable function of the unfettered soul. If the soul has no physical body nor limited mind, if he has, therefore, no mundane wants, in what manner could it be possible for him to be occupied at all when he leaves off his mortal coil? It is the problem of the boatman of the fable. The boatman could not find the solution by scratching his head with the help of the resources of his actual experience. He would have been better advised to inquire of those who knew about the function of a real king and who were not limited to his unwholesome experience of a life of unedifying menial drudgery. If a person, after being thus admonished and after being promised good things of which he can have no idea till he had actually seen them with his own unsealed eyes, is suddenly informed that he would have lots of servants to pull at the boat line for his pleasure and that he himself would only have to take his ease on the soft cushions spread inside the delicious cabin of a boat of wonderful quality, the boatman should no doubt be disposed to bless his extraordinary good fortune and be prepared to give up his own plans for the betterment of his condition, directed to an imaginary end. But if on the contrary the boatman were told in a blunt fashion that he would have to tug at the line of the boat that conveys Krsna on the blue waters of the Yamuna and would have to do so without being supplied with the amenities of quilts, etc., and without being allowed to quit his hold of the line for a moment, nor to have even the scantiest of meals after the longest intervals, should he have the stomach for welcoming such strange tidings so apparently contrary to all ideas of the prospective good fortune that he had been eternally promised with all the choice phrases of the mundane vocabulary? It is this sort of disappointment that is apt to be experienced by empiric expectants of transcendental enlightenment when they chance to meet the agent of the Absolute on this mundane plane. They have been building castles in the air from the moment that they were informed by the scriptures that they are not physical bodies but pure souls and that the soul has no cause of unhappiness. Like the boatman of the fable, the empiric sages, by ignorant inference from their mundane experiences, had proposed to themselves a condition which is to provide worldly amenities that would exceed their wildest demands. But how can any worldly amenities be of any use on the transcendental plane? The happiness and unhappiness of this world are of no use at all for the soul who happens to be located wholly beyond their limited and temporary jurisdictions. The conditions on the transcendental plane are wholly and inconceivably different from those on the mundane. The nature of the soul in the state of grace is also altogether different from the disposition and outlook of the temporary conditioned sojourn. In such circumstances it is foolish for the conditioned soul to embark on fictitious speculations on his own resources regarding the substantive nature of the function of the soul in the unfettered state. So without affecting to be undeceived by the actual conduct and words of the pure devotee, for the reason that they do not serve the purposes of our body and mind, it is necessary to turn one's unprejudiced attention to the real significance of such activities. One need not bring up the resources of worldly experience for understanding the tidings of the transcendental plane by the method of trying to assimilate them to the mundane. It is not necessary to accept them for the purpose of gaining any worldly end that one may have in view. Such ubiquity is out of court in the perfectly pure atmosphere of transcendental inquiry. The whole position has to be accepted as it is and for good. It is necessary to try to become acquainted with the real nature of what is offered as our only eternal function, from the point of view of the soul, and not from that of the body and mind. The body and mind are satisfied only when they receive an abundance of the deceptive treasures of this world. The mind covets subtler forms of acquisitions that can no more be retained than the grosser possessions of this world which it looks down upon. This accumulative aptitude, for no purpose of the soul, is apt to be accepted as the only function of human life. But why should it be obligatory on anybody to take the mind at its word? Why should one not agree to sit for a quiet half hour for taking stock of the permanent achievements of his life? Are any of our acquired million of items likely to endure? Is it desirable that any of them should endure? Suppose all of them could be had without any effort. Would they be worth one's while to have them? Or are their seeming values due to their being difficult to obtain and impossible to keep? Is not this a veritable wild goose chase from the point of view of substantive value? If a thing is really valuable for me, why should it tend to lose its value at all so long as I myself endure? So it is absolutely necessary to try in all sincerity to get over the habitual, but nevertheless abnormal, feeling of disappointment that is experienced by all conditioned souls when they read the accounts of the scriptures without being able to understand why it should be necessary for them to desire to have access to a realm which seems to resemble this world in many respects but is unduly lauded to the skies by a comparatively small number of the most peculiar type of people and their equally peculiar admirers. The answer to their reasonable question is supplied by the scriptures, and they should only have the patience to question with an open mind. If they are prepared not to accept nor desire any merely tentative solution applicable to the conditions of this temporary sojourn, they are likely to find the real answer to their real inquiry. Conclusion of the early part of the career of Sri Krishna Caitanya. I1 noticed in EIE2 transcendental eternal divine pastime. If three individual soul distinct from Godhead,